Daycare workers. What is a shocking family secret that you've been told by a 3-year-old? Story 1. Not a daycare worker, but I used to have a tax practice. A client came into my office to drop off his tax paperwork with his 5 kids ages 3 through 10 in tow. He said he needed to go run an errand and left, leaving the kids in my office for me to babysit while I worked on his taxes. The kids were shy, quiet, and well-behaved, but the youngest finally started a conversation with me.
My daddy hits my mommy.
Story 2. With a group of 3-year-olds, we were coloring paper ties for Father's Day and talking about what their dads like to do. As the kids were calling out their dad's hobbies, one little girl had an epiphany. She gasped and shouted in excitement, "I have a dad!" She had recently been adopted by her foster parents. Story 3. This isn't exactly scandalous. The shocking things I have heard usually involve abuse. We had a family from Texas move to the daycare I worked at in Illinois. The boy would try and tell us stories, but we could never get fully all the details for them to make sense. It would usually go like this. Boy.
Do you know who's bad?
Me. Who's bad? Boy.
The black man.
Me. Who? Boy.
The black man is bad. He hurts people.
Me. What man? Why does he hurt people? Boy.
The black man. He's scary.
After a few weeks of this, the boy was the one to always bring the black man topic up. I finally was able to discover that the black man was Darth Vader. I had assumed that perhaps this southern family had a streak of racism, but it just turned out that I was prejudiced against southerners. Story 4. Not sure if this counts. Wife runs one. Had a day off from work and a 6-year-old sits on the table next to me and we start talking about different fish in the world. His parents were divorced, so they had split custody. He and his sister only come part-time, so I grab my phone and look up different tropical fish and whatnot. After a bit, he tells me that he only likes his mom and sister and hates his dad, stepmom, and stepbrother. Talks about how he's going to light his dad's house on fire with the people he still hates in it. I told his stepmom about it when she came to pick him up. He went to therapy for a while. His real mom gets a new live-in boyfriend every month or so. Apparently one has given him swirlies a few times and another was a convicted child molester. The dad reports this mess to the Child Protective Services, but they never do anything about it. Story 5. Not really a shocking secret, but it got a laugh out of me. I had preschoolers rounded up for circle time. Going off their interest of the day, I decided to ask everyone who was a boy and who was a girl, since that happened to be the one thing every 3-year-old cared about that day. Through the sea of children, I hear a couple responses, "I'm a boy," "I'm a girl," etc. Then, out of nowhere, all the way in the back, I hear, "I'm black." He sure was. God, I missed that class. Good times. Story 6. I once had Child Protective Services called on my parents because I told my daycare worker there was nothing to eat and I was starving. True story was my mom hadn't had time to go get groceries and asked my dad to go before I left for daycare, saying something like, "Could you pick up the groceries? I don't want her to starve for another day tomorrow." I actually had breakfast that morning, but not the usual, and refused to eat it all. I never saw my mom so embarrassed ever again. My husband and I went on vacation for a week and left my then kindergartner with my MIL. The small weirdo was caught eating dog food out of a sandwich baggie on the playground during recess literally 12 hours after we left. His excuse to the teachers? "Grandma won't feed me." His excuse to his grandma? "The dogs like it a lot, so I wanted to try it." Thank everything holy the teachers knew us and Grandma. No scary Child Protective Services calls were made, and everyone, save for Grandma, had a good laugh. Grandma locked up the dog food until we came back. Story 7. When my son was 3, I bought my wife Titanic on video, yes, it was a long time ago, for her birthday. He asked if we could watch it after nursery school. We said that it wasn't really a film for children, and it was a film for grown-ups like mommy and daddy. When I picked him up later, his nursery teacher was stifling her laughter as he had been telling everyone all day that it was his mummy's birthday, and that daddy had bought mummy a special video that only mummies and daddies could watch. Story 8. I don't know if this counts, but a 3-year-old told me that he had belly aches every day because mommy gave him too much sleep juice. I said, "What's that?" I brought it up to her, and she said like it was all normal and fine, even with a little laugh. "Oh yeah, sometimes I just give him a little bit too much NyQuil because the little shit doesn't sleep." And I was like, no child that age should have any NyQuil. She laughed it off and said, "Oh, he's been getting it since he was a year old. Nothing bad has happened." And on top of that, the kid always comes in smelling like strong weed. Child Protective Services was called. Story 9. I once had a little girl tell me that she saw daddy licking mommy like a doggy. That was hilarious and awkward. There were a handful of really sad cases where children would disclose neglect or abuse. One girl in particular had a meltdown one day when she had an accident in her underwear. Turned out that her mom would just slap her around just gently enough to not leave a mark and lock her in a closet when she misbehaved, which included accidents. Needless to say, we reported her mother to Child Protective Services and we did a rush job washing the girl's clothing so she could go home in the same clothes she wore to school without her mom knowing about the accident. Lots of kids spilling the beans on new pregnancies or divorces, arguments between their parents, or infidelity. Kids see and hear a lot, and they tend to have an incredibly good memory of that kind of stuff. Story 10. I dated a girl with 2 kids. I was watching them while she went to the doctor. She had a serious medical problem, and she wanted the kids to not be there and see her all stressed out. Was watching Toy Story with her 3-year-old daughter. I guess the daughter started understanding that her mother and I are more than friends. She said, "Would you hit Mama?" I was shocked and I said, "Of course not. What put that idea in your head?" And she teared up and said, "My daddy used to hit her." And she started crying. I just did my best and I explained to her that I would never hurt any of them and how people who love each other should behave and that her dad had a sickness that caused him to act strangely. He was an addict. I got her a popsicle and she calmed down as Buzz Lightyear and Woody were flying into the car. I was aware that her dad hit their mom, but I didn't know if the daughter had witnessed it or would even remember. You're a good man. Story 11. My grandma owns a home daycare and a female toddler that she babysat decided to try and pull down a male toddler's pants and kiss his pee-pee. My grandma immediately asked where she learned it from. She said, "My daddy." My grandma reported it and an investigation was done. And her family was actually very grateful that she did it, even her dad. An investigation was done and they found nothing wrong and the parents 100% cooperated. Kids sometimes just say odd things, but they were glad to know that my grandma takes those sort of things seriously. So I guess it's not a family secret, but my grandma certainly thought it could have been at the time. Story 12. They tell me everything. If you lie to your daycare worker, your child will spill the beans. I have lots of 3-year-olds struggling with potty training. Every single parent will tell me they're working with their child at home. Your kid will tell me if that's true or if you're just putting them in diapers as soon as you get home. The biggest thing I've been told. One little girl mentions how her grandma tries to breastfeed her. Her grandma picked her up every day from daycare and had just about the whole afternoon with her, alone. We called parents and CPS, an investigation was done, and the grandma admitted to holding her like she was nursing but claimed that they were just cuddling. From my conversation with the little one, it sounded like it was definitely going on. She was really detailed for an almost 3-year-old. Grandma walked away unscathed and still picks up the little girl from daycare regularly. Story 13. I worked at a gym childcare center in high school and a pair of 4-year-old twins, one who appeared to be mentally disabled, with an older sister came in. Not 3-year-olds, but not very old. The little boy had all these weird scars all over his arms and legs like old cut marks healed over. The older girl, maybe 5 or 6, noticed me looking and calmly explained that it was from when his twin sister had gone after him with a knife and rolled up her sleeves to show me that she had the same marks all over her arms. Apparently the younger girl had serious issues and her parents apologized for not warning me when they came to pick her up. Never saw them again. The creepiest little girl I've ever seen. Enjoying the video? If you are, like and subscribe. It really means a lot and means we can keep making these. Anyway, back to the stories. Story 14. Oh my, I can't believe this isn't one of the first ones that popped into my head. There was a little girl and a boy, about 3 and 1. They were in foster care and had great foster parents. Well, they would get picked up about once a week by a social worker and taken to their parents for visits. Well, one time when they came back from the first unsupervised visit, the little 1-year-old started breathing really heavily and raspy and then all of a sudden barely breathing at all. We think it may have been an allergic reaction to something. Of course, we call an ambulance. Then, not even 10 minutes after he's off to the hospital, it happens to the little 3-year-old. But she starts throwing up and then not being able to breathe. So we're all like, okay, what the hell is going on? The owner goes to the hospital with the kids and calls later to let us know what's going on. Turns out the real parents poisoned both of the kids. They turned out okay. The little boy had a lot more in his system and was in the hospital for a few months. But overall, everything went back to normal. Needless to say, the parents went to prison. Their reason for doing it was because if they couldn't have them, then no one else was raising them. Which made no sense because they were fairly close to getting them back. You never know how awful some parents can be until you work in childcare. Story 15. Not a daycare teacher, but a parent. The little one was about 3.5 when I get a very serious phone call from her daycare to come in and talk about a comment my child had made. Jump in the car and zoom there as quickly as I could. And there's already a police car there. We get into the office to talk about what's happening. My child had told her teacher that the marks on her chest and back were from when I beat her. The police officer looks at me and tells me this is very serious, and I'm just about to burst into tears because I can't imagine why my beautiful daughter would say such a thing. Then I remembered what was actually on her chest and back, and burst out laughing like a maniac. My daughter had hives from an allergic reaction a couple of days before, and they were still slightly visible, even with the cortisone cream and antihistamines we were prescribed by the doctor. Had to explain that I never beat my child, and she had thought that because she had hives it means that bees had been living in her. And by having to take medicine and having a special cream that I was beeing her to get rid of all the bees. The police officer had a good giggle and the daycare teacher looked like she had just swallowed some lemons when I pointed out that only hours before I had just handed her all the proper documents. Doctor's note, description of the allergy plan, etc. Along with a bag of cream and medication for the hives. Story 16. I taught the toddlers, but as the day wound down and the number of kids in the building dropped, they would slowly all trickle into one room for playtime and basically wait to be picked up. I was the teacher in charge of the end-of-the-day playroom as well. There were two 11-year-old twins who were constantly happy, outgoing rays of sunshine. One day, they just weren't. I asked them if dinner was okay. Apparently, over the weekend, their family had gone out to dinner and a movie. Took about 3 to 4 hours. When they returned, their house was a bloodbath. Apparently, their 3 dogs had gotten into a fight, which resulted in one dog dying. The girl walked in on the 2 surviving dogs, covered in blood and eating the 3rd dog. Apparently, their parents enrolled them in therapy almost immediately, and it seemed to help a lot. Story 17. I'm putting together a book for my kiddo for when she graduates high school called Text from Daycare. I've taken screenshots of all the texts I would get throughout the 5 years that she was there. Once I was giving her a bath, I think she was about 3, and she wanted to use my body wash. I must not have rinsed the washcloth well enough when I cleaned her privates. It burned and I felt so bad. I texted daycare, her daycare provider is a friend of mine who I've known since kindergarten, that night to let her know what happened because I knew she would say, "Mommy burns my hoo-ha." The text I got the next day could only be described as epic. She said something like, "Mommy used her soap in my hoo-ha and it burned and I cried. But I told Mommy I know she didn't mean it, but don't ever use that burn soap again. I watched TV and I stopped crying, but then I cried again because I had hot pee and my mommy felt really bad, so I said no more burn soap." If I weren't so close to my daycare provider, that could have ended up very badly, possibly with a visit from the Department of Children and Families. Another fun note, the daycare provider was driving and said a bad word, apologized right away, and my kid pipes up from the back seat, "That's okay, Mommy says that word all the time, and she says heck to the cat." I do, that cat is a freaking mess. Story 18. Not necessarily a secret, but I caught a young boy and girl playing doctor and checking out each other's nether regions behind a bookcase. Apparently, it's somewhat normal for them to be curious, but wow, I was surprised. I remember being around 9 or 10 and playing with a friend of mine, and one of my neighbor boys. We didn't know him well, but I was one of the few kids with a trampoline in the area, so I got random visitors now and then. We were in the backyard, pretty secluded, when he told us, 2 girls, that he could make his willy stand up. Of course, neither I or my friends believed him, so he made us promise not to tell on him, took off his pants, and tried to make it stand. Stood there for a good half-minute until he said he couldn't do it right now, which my friend and I obviously took as confirmation that he was full of crap. No way you can make a willy stand up, right? I was actually in my late teens/early 20s when I realized what he was talking about. Story 19. Not a daycare worker, but I've done a lot of babysitting. When I was 15, I watched a 7-year-old whose mother worked with mine. Mom was a secretary, and the little girl's mom was an advanced practice registered nurse, APRN. I liked the kid. She was a smart girl, and I liked her mom. Anyway, one day the girl tells me that her mom's name isn't her real name, that she made it up for work, and it was like having a new mommy. I had no idea what the heck that meant, so I tried to ask more questions, but I didn't get very far, so I don't think the little girl really had an idea what was actually going on. She did tell me her mom's real name though, so I asked my mom about it. She didn't know either. She was curious, so she asked a couple of people at work. Turns out the woman I was babysitting for had somehow faked everything. Her name, identification, degree, and work history. She was not an APRN. She had no degree, her real name was not the name she'd been given. It was freaking crazy. Nobody had any idea how she did it. How she managed to fake her way through the job with no goddamn training. The office they worked at was a fairly large one and well-respected office in Connecticut. She was obviously fired and I no longer had my babysitting job. Story 20. So I work in a day nursery for about 4 or so years, and I will never forget the day a 3-year-old outed her mom and dad for having a swing in their bedroom by drawing a pretty graphic picture of the swing and her mommy laying back in it and her daddy kneeling down in front of her. We reported it to management because of the policies and procedures, but my lord, I had to leave the room and laugh right before I imploded. The same child, maybe 3 or 4 days later, pipes up during a conversation about religion. It was around Christmas time, so we were covering what religions have what festivals and gods, etc. She announces that her mummy loves God very much and she prays to him a lot at night. Without even thinking, we asked how does she pray. She responded by making sex moans and saying,
Oh my god, oh god, oh god, oh god, yes, I'm so close.
And she thought that it was sweet because she felt close to God. I miss this kid. Story 21. Taught pre-K for about 12 years. Had this kid that was crouching behind a bookcase. Upon closer inspection, he had a gum wrapper and the contents for a pencil sharpener and was rolling a joint. Had a kid tell me that his mom had a secret and he wanted to share it with me. He then told me about their roach problem and how he's not supposed to talk about it at school. That one made me laugh. Had a few kids over the years disclose some abuse. Child services got called with those. Kids tell everything. I know that your marriage isn't working out, your finances are, and even if you have loud sex, kids will tell it all. Story 22. I asked this question to my son's preschool teacher one day. She said one day it was story time and all the kids were sitting in a circle on the reading rug. She was reading them a book about animals and the sounds each one makes. An owl comes up and none of them know it, so she says, "It's an owl, and they make the sound hoo hoo." A kid declared, "Ooh, my mom makes that sound when mom and dad are having private time in their room." Story 23. I work with autistic kids. I work with one toddler mostly. He's low functioning and we're building language with him. One day he was with my supervisor. The kid picks up a thing of post-it notes, drops it, and then says in a whisper, "Damn it." In a family meeting, my supervisor told the kid's mom about this and we all laughed because he said "damn it" in the correct way instead of just saying it over and over. The mom couldn't stop laughing but agreed to try and watch her language when her son is near. Story 24. Wife works at a church on Mother's Day out. To get the job, she had to literally write a paper about how she found Jesus and how super close they were. All the women up there were super religious and judgmental about how evil the world is. The other day, she's changing an 18-month-old's diaper and found some weed that had come out of a grinder. I imagine that the parents must have tipped it over and missed a little bit while cleaning up and the kid managed to sit in it, which clung to the edge of the diaper. The mom actually works up there and is constantly complaining about the damned liberals destroying America. Story 25. I had a student in my class, age 3, who was constantly dropped off by his barefoot mom without any underwear. Granted, he was completely potty trained, so it wasn't a huge deal, so I just figured that they were just hippies. So one day we're coloring and talking about superheroes and punching comes up. "My mommy punches me." To which I responded, "You mean like this?" And he gave a light friendly nudge like, "Hey you," and he shook his head. "No, like this," and he slams his fist down on the table. So I told him it was a good thing he told me and asked for a substitute to take a potty time, which was code for "I need help from a senior employee." If you actually needed to pee, you use the term potty break. My manager met me in the front office and we filed a complaint with Child Protective Services. Unfortunately, I gave birth about a week later and never returned. So I don't know what became of him. Story 26. I used to do applied behavior analysis therapy with little kids who have autism spectrum disorder. With one kid, we were doing some pretend play. We were playing restaurant and I was the waiter while the kid was the customer. I asked her what she wanted to order and she ordered pasta. I asked her if she wanted to have a drink with that, maybe some water or juice. She said, "Oh, I'm the mummy, so I'll have the white wine, please." Terribly cute, and we got a little blush out of the girl's mom when I told her later on. Story 27. My niece's mother is a bit of a hoe. She and my brother broke up when she was pregnant because he wasn't sure the baby was his and walked out of everyone's lives. After around 5 years later, she shows up pregnant again and asking for child support and for my brother to be involved in the girl's life. Once the paternity test came back, that's what happened. While my brother was watching her, my niece said something about,
My sister won't have to wait for her daddy as I did. She's got a lot of daddies.
Parents, what is the most horrible secret you're hiding from your children? I don't want my son to know that he was an accident and that I didn't want a child when I was pregnant with him. I was young and had big plans for my career. I wanted to see the world, finish school, and make the most of my life. After he was born, it was hard for me to adjust, and it took a long time before I started to love being a mother. I didn't feel a connection to my son and felt like the worst mother ever. But now I can't stop looking at him, hugging him, or crying over him. I'm finishing school and I got a promotion at work. I can have my life and still be a mother. My only regret is that I didn't want my son at first, because he means so much to me. There are no words to describe how deeply I love him. As for why I didn't choose cancellation, before I was pregnant I was diagnosed with PCOS and had a small chance of getting pregnant. I wanted to have a child someday, but not at the time. We weren't ready for a child, or at least I didn't feel ready. When we found out I was pregnant, we thought about it. I was scared of everything. Being pregnant, giving birth, having a cancellation, the guilt, the regret. There were a lot of emotions and thoughts about this pregnancy. I decided to have the baby, so it was my choice to keep him, and I don't regret it. I had support from friends and family during and after the pregnancy. I even had a friend who felt the same way after giving birth. I grew up knowing my mother didn't want me, and it was something I was reminded of almost every day. It really messed me up, and I don't want my son to feel that way. He is very much wanted. One thing I can tell you for certain is that you are the best mother for that child. Congratulations. Story 2. I was the child in this scenario. When I was young, the man I thought was my dad passed away from leukemia. He wasn't around much, so I didn't see him often, but that wasn't the secret. I actually remember the day he left us for good. I woke up one morning and there was a pile of new toys on the living room floor with a note from my mom. After he got his diagnosis, he started to come around more, and we built something like a positive relationship before he passed away. When he passed, it was devastating for me. I still remember his funeral. I had to be dragged out of the car because I didn't want to see it. In his will, he left me his car, a Camaro, which I was supposed to get when I turned 16. But his parents fought really hard to keep it from me. They were not good people. His whole family was like that. We eventually just told him to keep the car. About 15 years later, I found out that the man who passed away wasn't actually my dad. He was my brother's dad. My real biological dad has been living in the next town over, just 20 minutes from my house, my whole life. My entire family knew about it, except for me. That's why my grandparents fought to keep the car. They knew I wasn't their son's son. I still don't know if he knew or not, but I assume he did. My maternal grandmother has met him several times in my life. My mom said he never thought it was something worth bringing up. She meant for me to never find out. I've never spoken to him. I know his name and roughly where he lives, as of about 10 years ago. Beyond that, I know almost nothing about the guy. My grandma said that if I ever want to meet him, she would help me get in touch with him. I'm not sure if I ever will. Story 3. Not a parent, but my parents kept a big secret from me for a long time. When I was a child, my dad used to volunteer at a baseball park, driving people back and forth in a golf cart. One night he came home really late. When I went to hug him, I stopped because he looked scared and upset. My dad is usually a strong and kind-hearted person, so I asked him what was wrong. He said nothing was wrong and that he was fine. I believed him and went to bed. The next morning I woke up to find our cousin, who also babysits us, at our house, but my parents weren't there. I asked where they had gone, and she told me they went to the morning church service instead of the afternoon one. Again, I believed her and didn't question anything. 10 years later, my mom told me the truth about what happened that night. My dad was driving a man back to the parking lot when the man threatened my dad and forced him behind a dumpster. When my dad got home, he waited until everyone was asleep and tried to end it all. My mom woke up in the middle of the night and noticed he wasn't in bed. She found him in the bathroom and called 911. He was rushed to the hospital and received treatment. Thankfully, he's still with us and doing well. I can't imagine where I would be without him. Story 4. When I was a teenager, I discovered something that happened when I was born. My dad didn't believe I was his child. He even wanted a paternity test so he wouldn't have to pay child support, thinking my mom had cheated on him during a business trip. I'm not sure why, but a paternity test was never done. Or maybe it was, and I was just never told the results. This explains why I felt so distant from my dad for the first 10 years of my life. He always seemed to like my older sister more. calling her cute names and such. I felt like he hated me, and this revelation explained why. Nowadays, he's the best dad ever. I'm not sure what changed, but we're extremely close now, and he loves me very much. He's been a great dad, especially when I was struggling with bad thoughts in high school and dealing with emotional distress. My mom has some issues on her own, so our household has always been a bit toxic. My dad was the only one who would come and get me, just being there for me when I needed him. Story 5. We won the lottery for $12.5 million, and no one in our family, not even our children, knows about it. The only people who know besides us and the government are an attorney we hired to keep our identity secret and an accountant. We've kept our lives pretty much the same. We both still work, so it looks like we have a regular income, and we enjoy what we do. We didn't want anything to change too much. We didn't want to ruin our relationship with everyone or spoil our kids. We've invested the money safely for their future. But they won't know about it until they've made their own way in life without knowing there's a safety net. We support many charities. Winning the lottery is a blessing, but an even bigger blessing is not being destroyed by the money. Wow. $12.5 million? He's lucky to live in a state that allows you to keep your identity private. I daydream way too much about winning, but no, it probably won't be worth it thanks to having my identity exposed. And kudos to him for supporting many charities. Story 6. I'm worried about my children finding out just how their biological father mistreated me and how he neglected our eldest child, even though he depended on her emotionally. He never wanted a son and showed no interest in our second child. My biggest fear is them witnessing the mistreatments. They don't realize how my heart races when there's a knock on the door. They think I don't let them play alone in the front yard because of the traffic, not because I'm scared their biological father might find them and take them away. They believe I dislike crowds and rude people because they're annoying, not because I'm always anxious, looking for him. They'll never know I confided in our school principal about our past after seeing one of his Facebook posts. They'll never know the carefree person I used to be. And that makes me sad. My eldest, who's getting older, has started asking questions. One of her earliest memories is coming home to find me in a police car because Daddy was too sick to take care of me, so the police brought me home. I know I'll have to explain more soon. It's been 3.5 years since my kids have seen him. The thought of explaining our past terrifies me. Story 7. That my daughter isn't biologically mine. I met her mother, who's now my wife, when she was 3 months pregnant. Neither of us knew about the pregnancy until we had been dating for a month or two. What I did know was that this woman was the one for me. When she found out she was pregnant, she told me and gave me the option to leave without any hard feelings. She didn't want me to stay just because she was pregnant and then leave afterward. I chose to stay and commit to her and the baby. It was the best decision I ever made, and I've never regretted it. Now we have our daughter and a son. I don't plan on telling our daughter about her biological father unless she asks when she's older. The biological father moved to Colorado and removed all ties when he found out about the pregnancy. That was fine with me. As far as everyone, including the government, is concerned, I am her father. My name is on the birth certificate and everything, but in my heart, I truly am her father. I was there for the entire pregnancy, her birth, and every day since. Story 8. My daughter will have her birthday in August, so I'm not hiding anything from her right now, but I'm really not sure how I'll tell her in the future that she was conceived during a mistreatment. Months later, I found out I was pregnant because of what happened. My family situation is a bit unusual. We're close, but distant. I was in deep sorrow. I lost my job and avoided people. When I discovered the pregnancy, people encouraged me to have a cancellation. I thought about it seriously, even though I don't believe in it. I couldn't go through with it. I decided to have the baby and give her up for adoption. When the time came, I gave birth to a baby girl, completely alone. She was born a month early and spent time in the NICU. During that time, I worked with an adoption agency and signed over custody so that if she was released, she'd go to one of their foster homes until I chose a family for an open adoption. I couldn't let her go. It was love at first sight. I saw her briefly while recovering. Now she was playing on the floor beside me as I write this, with tears in my eyes. A week after giving birth, I broke down and told my sister-in-law that I didn't want to just let her go. My sister-in-law helped me tell my family and provided things I needed to welcome her home. My daughter didn't ask for this any more than I did. I had all these irrational fears, that I'd resent her, see his face instead of hers, not be able to bond with her or even love her. There have been very tough days, especially at the beginning. I still have doubts about whether I'm the best person for this, but seeing a specialist has helped me cope. She's a beautiful little girl with a wonderful personality. She's a joy to be with and the best thing I've ever done, probably saving my life. It's just us against the world, and I think I'll eventually tell her, but just thinking about it makes me anxious. All I can say is that I chose love. I chose her despite everything, and she's my tiny miracle, a light in a very dark time. Only a few family members and friends know about her, and even fewer know the full story. It's very relieving to share this after keeping it in for so long. The biggest challenge is finding peace. I've wished a million times that it never happened to me, but if it hadn't, I wouldn't have her. I think this is the bravest story I've read. To take such experience and still allow yourself to fall in love with your daughter is strength beyond compare. To work through the trauma so that you and she can truly live your best lives takes insight and courage that I haven't seen in many people. Story 9. When my wife was giving milk to her son, she decided to walk to another room. As she walked through a doorway, she accidentally hurt her son. A few weeks later, we were at the hospital because his head seemed a bit large and we were worried. They did an MRI, and it turned out he had a complication. For a while, we were under suspicion of mistreatment, but further tests showed that wasn't the case. No one could figure out exactly what happened, and it was eventually diagnosed as benign external hydrocephalus, or something similar, and the complication was linked to that condition. His head is quite big, and as he grows, he might be teased about it. My wife doesn't know that the incident was her fault, and neither do the doctors. I'm the only one who remembers what happened, and I plan to keep it to myself forever because she doesn't need that guilt in her mind. It was a really tough time for us. She was still recovering from giving birth, which had complications, and she had to wake up every few hours to give milk to her son. We were both exhausted and not fully alert. If I hadn't been so out of it, I might have prevented the accident. And if she hadn't been so tired, it wouldn't have happened in the first place. I feel partly responsible because it was my job to prevent things like that. I believe she would do the same for me, or at least I like to think she would. Story 10. One of my teachers shared a story with our class that was really surprising. He grew up with an older sister and 2 parents, which seemed like a typical family. He was always confused by how much older his sister was. I think she was about 16 or more years older than him. When he was in high school, he asked his parents if he was an accident. They told him he wasn't planned, but it didn't bother him much because he was old enough to understand and knew they loved him. Later in life, both of his parents passed away, and his sister lived far away. One year, his sister came to visit him and his wife for a week. They did lots of fun things together, like visiting famous places and eating in nice restaurants. He said they had a great time. Towards the end of her visit, his sister said she had something important to tell him and his wife. She seemed really upset, so he thought she might be sick or something bad like that. It was a tense few minutes because she was having trouble saying what she needed to. This made him and his wife even more worried. Finally, she told him, "I'm not actually your sister. I'm your mother." It turned out that his parents were really his grandparents, and his sister had him when she was very young, with a guy she knew. To give him and his mother a normal life, his grandparents raised him as their own son. He said he was thankful for what they did, because he had a normal childhood and his mother didn't have to deal with the stress of being a young mom. Even after finding out the truth, he and his mother have a great relationship. It didn't change anything between them. Story 11. My children and my wife don't know that I had another family before them. My wife is aware that I dated other women before her, including some long-term relationships. She knows that I was engaged once, but she doesn't know that I had a baby girl with a former fiancé, and I never plan to tell her. Nor will I tell anyone that her baby passed away from a fever. My wife believes that my engagement just didn't work out and that my ex got really crazy. The truth is, we were both devastated by what happened. We couldn't continue our lives together. We grew to resent and hate each other, and we acted out in terrible ways. No one from my past is still in touch with me, except for my brother, who has kept my secret for 20 years. My parents passed away before they could really get to know my wife. Friends and other family members from that time have all moved away or lost touch over the years. My former fiancé hasn't spoken to me since then and now lives on a different continent. As far as I know, she hasn't dated anyone else, but she did finish her education and start a career. I hope she's happy. The kids don't need to know they have a half-sister. They don't need to know that their father sees her face in theirs every day. They don't need to know that he's been broken inside since before he even met their mother. Story 12. My youngest daughter isn't mine. I met her mom one night at a bar, but I was too hammered to really connect with her, and nothing happened between us. We talked on and off for months while we were both seeing other people. Later, I found out she was pregnant. I decided to start dating her anyway. I learned that the biological dad was a real pain who didn't plan to support her or be a father to her. He just wanted to take cool selfies for his friends and to impress girls. We decided to remove him out of the picture and I pretended to be the dad. I signed the birth certificate and everything. The biological dad came over once. I tricked him into believing that she had cheated on him while they were dating, confirming his suspicions that the child was mine. I haven't seen him since. Some of my family members know the truth and have tried to tell my other kids that she isn't their real sister. I've told them that those family members are just troublemakers, which is true. I made up a story that I got my now wife pregnant the first time we met at the bar, and we didn't get back together until she found out she was pregnant. So, everyone except for a few difficult family members believe this version of the story. Everything is great now. We've had more kids together, and the people who know the big secret only know part of the lie. The only ones who knew the whole truth are my wife and me. Sometimes I feel guilty about what I did, but then I check up on the biological dad and realize that our daughter isn't missing out on anything. He's still pretty immature. I hope we never have to tell her the truth. But with advances in medical science, it might come up someday. The real secret is that she's my favorite child out of all of them. Not even my wife knows that. Story 13. I'm not a parent, but I am a sibling. And there was a time when I had to keep a secret for my sister's sake. My sister had been having episodes for a few years before she was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Before this diagnosis, my family and my sister thought she just had episodes and didn't worry too much about it. After her episodes got worse and her abilities started to decline, she was finally diagnosed when she was a teenager. Patients with this illness usually live for 5 to 10 years after the symptoms start, but sadly, my sister only lived for a couple more years before she passed away. The effects of the illness are similar to dementia, causing decline that makes the person act more like a toddler. This happens very quickly, and soon, patients need constant care. For the 2 years between her diagnosis and her passing, we told many lies to keep my sister from realizing how serious her condition was. Our main goal was to give her the best quality of life and to delay the inevitable for as long as possible. One of the biggest lies we told was about changing her classes and sports activities. Since my sister was still in high school, we wanted to keep her involved in school and sports for as long as we could, so she could spend time with her friends. She was the goalie for her high school soccer team, but we convinced her not to play because it could be dangerous. She was okay with just cheering on her team. We tried to keep her in her regular classes, but after a semester, it was clear she couldn't keep up. This was really frustrating for her because she used to be quite smart. She went from doing well in honors and AP courses to struggling a lot in regular classes. The teachers at her high school were incredibly understanding and gave her passing grades even if she couldn't complete all her work. They also created a supportive environment for her, which was a huge but unrecognized effort. After a semester of struggling, it got so severe that we had to move her to special education classes. Thankfully, by that point, she didn't question the change much and only asked about it a few times, mainly because she missed seeing her friends in her old classes. The school and her friends were very accommodating, letting her hang out with them even when she wasn't in the same classes. Another significant lie was during a family vacation. The Make-A-Wish Foundation sent us on a trip to Hawaii, and during a luau, I had to help my sister down to the beach because she had trouble walking. Even though I had 3 other siblings, I was alone with her in the water. She asked me why her parents couldn't come down and enjoy the water with her. The real reason was their parents were crying together. Knowing this would be our last family vacation, I told her because it was her parents hadn't been to Hawaii before and wanted some alone time for a spontaneous date during the luau. She believed me and even smiled, happy for them. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but looking back, it was incredibly hard. The last major lie was just before my sister passed away. She got sick and she was in the hospital for a week, but she was tired of hospitals and just wanted to go home. She couldn't speak much or remember me and other family members, so she was often frustrated when we tried to help her. My sister loved a Mexican food place called Cafe Rio, and after a few days in the hospital, she actually spoke and said she wanted to go there when we drove home. But this time we had already discussed with the doctors about a DNR order. They said it was unlikely she would recover, and we knew that was it. When she asked for Cafe Rio, I told her I would not only go with her, but also pay for her meal. She liked it when I, her younger brother, was nice and did things for her. I remember she smiled, which might have been the last time I saw her smile, as she passed away the next day. Thank you for that smile, Kelsey. It meant more than you could ever know, and I'm just sorry it had to be you. I can't even imagine how tough that would be. I'm not usually affected by stuff I read, but this story got to me. Tearing up here. Well, anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 14. When I was about to start middle school, my parents told me I had a half-sister who was my dad's daughter. She was in college, and my parents had been in touch with her for years, even helping to pay for her college tuition. My mom went to talk to her and arranged for her to come and meet her half-brothers and her father. My younger brother and I loved her immediately. We talked to her whenever we could, and she always sent us gifts for birthdays and holidays. She lived in a different state, so it wasn't easy to visit, but we saw her quite often, especially during the summer. She even went on vacation with us. She didn't know our family well, but she seemed happy to have us in her life. After she graduated from college, she stopped talking to my brother and me. My parents had already paid for college, so they didn't need to be nice anymore. This happened many years ago, but I'm still very hurt by it. I've tried to contact her a few times, but she hasn't responded. She's now married and has a child, and I probably won't ever meet them. Honestly, I wish I'd never known I had a half-sister. Story 15. When my partner and I were young, she got pregnant. We went to a clinic similar to Planned Parenthood a few times because I insisted. I wasn't being very caring or supportive. I was just telling her what to do, listening to everything I said. Just before the appointment to have the cancellation, she showed a lot of confidence that I hadn't seen before. She firmly told me that she was going to keep the baby and that she didn't care what I wanted. She also said that if I changed my attitude and put in the time and effort, we could still be a couple and I could be a dad. When she stood up to me like that, it made me see things differently. I realized that I didn't want to end it either, and I definitely didn't want to break up. We ended up getting married, going to school, and finding jobs. We're now expecting our third child in June. I love our son, and his sister and the baby brother on the way, with all my heart. But our son doesn't need to know that I didn't want him in this world at first. Story 16. Not a parent, but my sister and I have different fathers, and she never knew hers. She always knew that my dad wasn't her dad, but she was told by her parents that her biological dad left when her mom got pregnant and moved to California. This really hurt my sister for her whole life because she couldn't understand why he didn't want her. It made things worse that my dad, her adoptive father, was really bad to us, so she felt like she had two terrible fathers. She found out from my aunt that her biological father had loved her whole life and had tried many times to be part of her life, but our parents wouldn't let them meet her. He stayed in touch with the rest of the family and got updates and pictures of her as she grew up. They finally connected when she was older, and he's a wonderful person. It's really sad to think that she grew up with a bad father when she could have had a great father-daughter relationship with a real dad, if our parents had just let him meet her. Story 17. I'm not a parent, but I'm the child with a secret my parents don't know I'm aware of. My parents had a really bad divorce when I was young. My dad had a problem and was irresponsible with money, which I think were the main reasons they split up. My dad didn't handle the divorce well. My mom sent me to a friend's house where she called the police on him because he was causing trouble. Unfortunately, I was in a room at the neighbor's house where I could see our home, so I witnessed a lot. The worst part was when my dad actually took me for a short time. He just took me and drove away. And I remember my mom chasing after the car, crying. Thankfully, he brought me back because I was crying a lot, so it was only for a few minutes. My parents think I've forgotten all about these events. They pretend like nothing ever happened. And on my birthday last year, my mom showed me some childhood photos. One of them had red markers scribbled over her face. This happened because my dad tore up a bunch of family photos during the divorce and drew on my mom's face with a marker. When my mom saw me staring at the photo, remembering what happened, she said that I was the one who drew on her face. That's when I realized they had no idea I remembered. I should mention that my parents are back together now. After almost 10 years, they remarried. I'm not sure why. Maybe she forgave him, or they were both lonely. He still took money from me sometimes, which I'm sure he doesn't know I'm aware of, so it seems he still has money issues, although he seems to have stopped taking my money. So with them being together again, they really hope I don't remember the past. I was young and I went to therapy for a year, though I don't think it helped much, so they probably think I've forgotten. If I brought it up, it would definitely make things awkward. Well, too bad, because I remember everything and probably will never forget. I've never mentioned that I know about what happened, not since I was a kid. This makes them even more likely to believe I'm unaware, but in reality, I wish I could forget, so I never talk about it. You could say I'm keeping a secret from them too. If it makes them happy, then I guess it's okay. Story 18. Our children don't know much about what happened when I was married to their father. They were very young when he left, and it was the day after Christmas. Luckily, they don't remember most of it. I had health issues, which made it hard for me to do many things. Despite this, I worked more than 40 hours a week in a shipyard on the night shift and took care of our young twins. Because of my limitations, he would call me lazy if the house wasn't perfectly clean and dinner wasn't ready for him when he came home, even though I worked nights. When he left us, we just moved to a different part of the country, and he had asked me not to go back to work right away so we could settle in. So I was left with 2 kids to care for, no job and no income. I also discovered bank accounts and credit cards with my name on them that I knew nothing about. He was gone for almost 5 years with very little contact. Then there was a big issue with custody a few years ago when he took the kids for a visit and refused to give them back. He took them to different doctors until he found one who would say what he wanted. As a result, everyone in my family was investigated for different types of mistreatments, all of which were made up. I didn't get to see my children for almost 2 years. After he finally returned them, he ended up being investigated for various things. He then gave up his parental rights and made sure I wouldn't ask him for money. Not that I ever received any from him anyway. The kids still won't tell me everything that happened with him, but I know some of it from court documents and medical records. They want nothing to do with him, even though I told them they can have a relationship with him once they grow old if they want. He made his choice, and they made theirs. So, that's my difficult secret. I've never lied to them about any of it. but there are some things I believe they don't need to know. Story 19. My daughter has never met her father and never will. When she was conceived, her father was married and claimed to be starting the divorce process. I was also married with other children and had filed for divorce 9 months before. Her father decided to stay with his wife but continued to visit me. I wasn't allowed to tell him when she was born because he was supposedly very emotional, so I emailed him 5 days after her birth. He begged to see me, so I met at a hotel with her daughter. He was extremely intoxicated, and when I stepped out to get something from my car, I returned to find him pacing the room with her in his arms. That was the only time he ever held her. He then put her down and asked to be intimate. When our daughter was growing up, he tried to stop all contact with me. In response, I filed for child support, which caused a lot of trouble. He's a college professor and his wife at the time had medical conditions. And as soon as she found out about my daughter, she started calling herself a stepmom and begged for a relationship with her. She showed up at my apartment and followed me around town. My lawyer suggested posting things to see how far she would get. Eventually, she realized that he wanted nothing to do with my daughter, so she divorced him. This was likely also because he had other affairs and developed a habit. She then married someone who robbed a local bank and got arrested at their house. Meanwhile, my daughter's father has blocked all contact with us. He occasionally reaches out to ask for social security numbers. He asked for mine last year, which is strange since we were never married, and he emailed 2 days ago for our daughters. Our daughter is beautiful. He's still teaching at the college, and his brother is a well-known director in the New York City Theater District who teaches at NYU. My daughter will never know him or his family. I'm currently working on my degree to become a higher education teacher. My life is in a great path. I'm raising my incredibly beautiful and smart little girl to be a much better person. She will never know the story of her conception, and her father will never seek a relationship with her. Story 20. I'm not a parent. However, the worst secret I have found out about is that I have a biological brother. I was really young when my mother had him. Due to already having me and my sister, my parents couldn't afford a third child, so they put him up for adoption. He was adopted by, from their words, 2 nice people who sadly couldn't have kids. As time went by, I remember hanging out with him as a child, but I was told he was my cousin or something. I was still young, so my Batman skills weren't exactly on point yet. Fast forward about 14 years, my mom, who I love, has bad behavior when she's really hammered. I'm outside and I say something to her, which she interprets the wrong way. She tells me I have a brother. Fell out of contact with the parents and doesn't know anything other than their first names. So, me, being so tech-savvy, go and start looking up random Facebooks trying to find this kid, which apparently was his nickname. After finally finding his real name, I found him on Instagram and broke the news to him on Christmas night. He seems cool and I can't wait to meet him. So, hopefully my parents don't have anything else because that was pretty bad finding out so late. Story 21. This is something I keep hidden not just for my children, but for my entire family. It's not an easy topic to bring up, and I struggled to tell my husband, who I've been with for 9 years. He is the only one who knows, and I only told him because I'm very cautious about what my children do when they're alone together in their rooms. He noticed that I get too anxious when they close and lock their doors. I'm always checking on them. But anyway, I was mistreated by my older brother. This went on for about a year or 2. I don't fully remember when it stopped or how, but it still haunts me and makes me feel bad when I think back. I then started remembering those memories more clearly. I would ask myself, how did I let those things happen? It's scary how kids can be manipulated. I never told my parents. They spoil my brother because he's special. I feel like even if they knew, they would just brush it off. The family only knows about him mistreating my cousin. I'm afraid my sister might have been mistreated as well, but she doesn't remember much from her childhood. Sometimes I think she might have buried those memories like I did. Those events haunted me and made me vigilant about my children's behavior. I made sure to often have the talk with them and emphasize that no means no. It's really hard to talk about this, even with strangers. It hurts my heart and brings tears to my eyes. I'm very passionate about helping children, and I hope to become a pediatric psychologist to assist families who have gone through similar experiences. Story 22. That my oldest daughter was an accident, and when I found out I was pregnant, I seriously thought about having a cancellation. It might not sound as bad as it is, or maybe it's even worse. I'm not really sure. My husband and I weren't married yet. We had been together for 10 years. I even think she might have been conceived on her 10th anniversary. We were engaged and had been for a long time, but we wanted to pay for our own wedding, which wasn't very expensive, but we always had money problems. I had just started my first job in my new career, and I wasn't paid very well. I was worried that my boss would find a way to fire me if he found out I was pregnant, which would make it really hard to find another job since in Canada, we're allowed to take a year off for maternity leave. My husband was unemployed because he had left a really bad job where he had to do the work of 2 people by himself. We were living in an old house that needed a lot of repairs, and we were renting it from my dad's company. We didn't have any savings, and I was scared that my career was in trouble. Finding out I was pregnant was a shock. How were we going to be parents? Nothing we wanted to have before having kids was ready, except that I'd finished college. But we did want kids. The timing was bad, but I really wanted to be a mom and have babies with my now husband. After a lot of thinking and talking with family and friends, we decided not to have a cancellation and got ready for the baby. As much as I love her and don't regret my decision, I was right to be worried. I never worked in my field again. When I started to show that I was pregnant, my job became redundant, and I was laid off while I was visibly pregnant. Luckily, my dad found a place for me in his company to answer phones for the rest of my pregnancy. I had my baby in late 2007. We all know what happened in 2008. There were a lot of people looking for work in my field. They had much better qualifications and more experience than I did. So I've been working at jobs just to pay the bills. We had one good time when we were financially stable. We decided to have a second child, but then things fell apart again. It seems like things are getting better now because my husband has a higher paying job where he's a supervisor, and I have a job that I really like and where I can move up. But having my oldest daughter changed the direction of our lives in many ways. I'll probably tell her about this one day, but she doesn't know yet. Story 23. It was Christmas Eve. My wife and our daughter were out looking at Christmas lights, but my son and I stayed home because I don't like crowds and he doesn't like the cold. We were sitting in the living room watching The Nightmare Before Christmas. It's his and my favorite movie. He loves the character Zero. When someone started pounding on the front door, I went to open it, and when I did, I was looking down on a weapon held by a man in a dark red trench coat. He was clearly on something. He said, "Let me in. I just want your stuff. No one has to get hurt." Then he let himself in. My mind was racing because if he hurt my son in any way, I knew I would end up in jail. He walked me into the kitchen and started looking around for valuable things, and I heard my son walking towards us, and I was panicking, not knowing what to do. My son walked in and saw me and the burglar, and in the most innocent voice he asked, "Santa?" Looking at the burglar, I looked at the guy, and something was going through his mind. He said, "Yep, it's me, Santa. I'm just here to talk to your daddy about how good you've been this year. Now you go back so I can talk to him and your surprise doesn't get ruined." My son looked at me. I told him to go back to the living room, which he did. Once my son was back in the living room, the burglar turned to me and said, "I didn't know you had kids. I'm sorry." And then he quickly left through the door. I called the police and my wife and daughter came home. It was a big mess. The whole time my son was telling the police, the paramedics, my wife and his sister, "I got to meet Santa." He's a little older now and he has no idea we were almost robbed. I have no idea when I'll tell him about that night. Story 24. I'm the aunt in this situation, and I'm still not sure what to do. My sister started dating a guy named Jake years ago. Jake had a newborn with a woman he met for just one night. They share custody, and he pays child support, but there's no romantic relationship with the first mom. 3 months after the baby was born, and not long after my sister started dating Jake, he got my sister pregnant. They decided to get married right away, which wasn't a good idea. My sister had my nephew, the second baby, just a little less than a year after the first baby was born. The two kids are step-siblings and know each other. But here is the problem. While my sister was pregnant, Jake cheated and got the third woman pregnant. Her baby was born a few months after my nephew. The issue is that both the dad and the mom of the third baby were cheating. Jake knows the baby is his because the baby has the same genetic defect as the other two kids, Jake, and many people in his family. But another man is raising Jake's child, thinking it's his. The child doesn't know the truth, and my nephew and niece don't know they have another half-sibling. This is definitely a situation where I feel like it's not my place to tell the kids the truth, but since I know what's really going on, I feel involved whether I like it or not. I'm worried that this secret will come out somehow, and I'm afraid of the questions like, why didn't you tell us? And is it fair to the other man who's raising Jake's child, thinking it's his, without getting any child support from Jake? I really don't know what to do. Story 25. When my son was still developing, he was originally one of triplets. At 15 weeks into the pregnancy, we had to make a very difficult decision. We chose to cancel the pregnancies of his brother and sister to save his life. We had to do this because babies B and C had problems that put the entire pregnancy at risk. It was a heartbreaking and painful decision to make, but we had one healthy baby, and it was our responsibility to save him. We plan to tell him about this when the time is right, which we think will be when he's in high school. He's young and he's not ready to understand something like this. I used to be a therapist for children, so I have some experience in knowing when children are ready for such information. What's the most disturbing secret you've discovered about someone close to you? The 24 hours before my dad passed, stage 4 lung cancer, He was in the ER and then the ICU, and we were unable to be with him because of hospital rules. My mother, sister, and myself had been texting and calling him all day and got no response. My mother even called the hospital and spoke with one of his ICU nurses who said he was awake and communicating fine. He passed very quickly at 3:30 a.m. the next morning. We were allowed to be at his bedside, but by then he was no longer conscious, so we said our goodbyes and he was gone. Later that morning, while my mom slept, I was calling cremation services to schedule him for pickup at the hospital. And going through his bag of belongings the hospital had returned to us, his phone was still there, and I wanted to read all our texts and take some comfort in my last words to him. I opened his phone and all our texts had not been read. Not mine or my mom and sister's. I thought this was so odd, but figured he must have been suffering so much he couldn't find the strength. I began to scroll through his apps and noticed a chat app I'd vaguely heard of. I can't recall the name, but it essentially works like WhatsApp. I opened the app and saw a single contact with a female name. I started reading and realized my dad had been chatting with a girl hourly for the last 24 hours, and as far back as I could scroll. He was calling her princess and telling her he loved her, and she was saying she was scared for him and wanted to know what was going on, why he was in the ER, etc. I scrolled back enough to know that this was someone he was having, at the very least, an emotional affair with. My grief was completely hijacked by hurt and anger, and a week later I tracked the girl down and spoke to her, via DMs. He was her high school bus driver, and she told me they had been dating for almost 2 years. My dad was 66 years old when he passed and was dating someone younger than his grandchildren, someone he chose to spend his last moments with and say his last goodbyes to. I hope it made him happy, but it sure is a bad secret to live the rest of my life with. A secret that will forever overshadow my entire relationship with my dad with no chance to ever speak to him about it. It's the one secret I wish I'd never found out. Oh man, that is absolutely devastating. Story 2. I don't know how disturbing this is. It turned out pretty fantastic for one, but not for another. I was adopted and told a silly magical story about my birth parents that most certainly did not seem true, even when I was a child. At 57, I learned I was the result of a college affair between a very seriously Jewish young man and a very Baptist young woman. She was rushed off to a home for wayward girls to give birth. They followed her there, many states away, begging her to keep me and live a life together, but their families both said absolutely not. Jewish people were not viewed as white in the mid-60s, and her family most certainly did not want her marrying a non-white. Plus, she was a very committed Christian and did not want to convert to Judaism. So off I went, into another family. I recently discovered 3 lovely half-siblings, and we're all pro or semi-pro musicians and get along well. Never got to meet my mother. She passed away a year before I searched. My father is out of the picture and wants to be left alone, and I'm fine with that. I'm grateful for the love he gave me. It was enough. Another person that was in my non-bio family was also adopted. She was older than me. She tracked down her mom later in life, too. She was in a hospital and had been since the day she was born. She was born holistically disabled. Physical, mental, cognitive, learning, sensory. Endings to our search are not always happy. Story 3. She was my best friend for 7 years. We'd literally been through it all together. I moved out of state with my now husband, but she convinced us both to move back to be closer with her after about a year. We had no real ties to the state we had tried out, so we said, who cares? Let's go back. She's basically family. We were also happy to be reunited. She was over almost every night for dinner. We all laughed and talked and had a good time. Best year of my life. And slowly she started trying to turn my husband and I against each other. Anytime we had an argument, like any couple does, she would text each of us about how right we were, trying to foster animosity between the two of us. With me, she started talking about how she had a plan B for us, that if my husband and I couldn't make it work, I could move in with her and we'd live happy lives together. With my husband, she started talking about her issues and how she wanted to have a kid just like him. She just needed a donor. This all happened at around the same time, and my husband and I compared texts and figured it out. She wanted to take his sample and have a baby with me. When confronted about it, she refused to admit anything and started lashing out at both of us. It got to the point where she would show up unannounced, knocking on the door, demanding a place in our home. It was so terrifying and panic-inducing that we ended up having to move and change our phone numbers. I guess it's so disturbing because I'd never had a friend like her. Only to find out that she cared about me, but in such an unhealthy and scary way. But yeah, that's my story. Husband and I are great now, by the way. Well, that's the weirdest thing I've read all day. Story 4. A work colleague appeared on the front page of a national newspaper for a life of fraudulent qualifications. He claimed medical and law degrees, was a brigadier in the army, Reserves, was the CEO for a major health fund. He actually was a brigadier in the Army Reserves, but that and the health fund role were largely built on the fraudulent qualifications and a progression of jobs also based on these claims. In reality, the only qualification he actually held was as a mortuary assistant. Not even his wife knew. The fraudulent degrees had been gained when he was in the Army Reserves recruiting, and he had access to submitted position applications. He came undone when he applied for a government job and some flags were raised by the recruitment people. He tried to withdraw the application but didn't realize that an application for a government role has the same weight as a statutory declaration and cannot be withdrawn. It all went south very quickly, and he ended up doing jail time. Story 5. A former friend of mine from childhood was a youth pastor at a summer church camp. Turns out he was picking on young girls and teens both at camp and online after camp was over. Only reason I found out was back in 2011, he was in his late 20s at the time. One of the girls told her parents and the cops posed as her online while he was doing something disturbing into a webcam. The cop then convinced him to drive 3 hours to go meet up. When he showed up at the girl's place in the middle of the night, the cops were waiting and arrested him. He's now a convicted offender and did time in jail. The crazy part? Once he got out, he moved to Texas and married a divorcee that had kids. He's also now the Dean of Online Studies at his church and is responsible for growing the number of students taking classes online. Story 6. While my cousin was walking around with her son in the woods, she came across a hunting stand. She climbed it and found a pair of binoculars. Sitting straight forward and lifting the binoculars to her eyes, she saw her own bedroom window. Let's be logical here. If it was a legit hunting stand, it was facing and closer than 500 feet to a residence, which is illegal, which means it had to come down with prejudice. If it was a spy, well, it had to come down with prejudice. When my brother and I visited not long after, she showed us where it was. He tore it down and literally wrapped it around a couple trees, vented to complete uselessness. I got an angry call the next day. Did you tear down a hunting stand yesterday? Yeah, I did. That was your uncle's. Her mother's brother. Turns out my cousin reported it to the family and they ignored the issue. When the uncle was asked, he said there was just an old treehouse out there. Even when he was exposed, they didn't really care. They were more upset about the damage we did. Suffice it to say, I've written off most of that side of the family. Story 7. When I was young, I had vague ideas about my uncle being dodgy. At family events such as weddings, etc., my parents would tell me and some of my cousins to stay away from him. When I was in high school and we were doing a lesson in citizenship class where we had to get pieces from a newspaper, no idea why, and I came across an article saying he'd been recommitted to Broadmoor prison. Went home and Googled him and found out he'd been in prison in the 80s for different crimes, and had been in and out of prison since for other offenses. He also tried to sue the Sun once for defamation since they printed something incorrect about him. He was awarded 1P by the court because it technically was defamation, but it was agreed that what they had printed couldn't have damaged his reputation any further. All I know is that he was in a halfway house for a long time. However, from what I've gathered, he was released around 5 years ago. Story 8. I found out when I was an adult that my mother didn't just abandon me one day after work, like I'd been led to believe. Turns out she had been mistreated. She said they took her wallet and made a disgusting comment about my picture inside. I would have been a toddler at this time, and she was just too scared to go home. She said they'd follow her. She said it when it was over and my stepdad took her to the hospital. They had to stitch everything back together down there. She spent that time away on and off the psych ward. My mom and I still have a rocky relationship for reasons beyond this, but I definitely understand her better. She's had issues with drinking and her mental health all my life, and I really think it's because she's never sought proper help for what happened to her. Underneath all that trauma, drinking, and grief is my mother. And she's one of the most beautiful souls that'll ever walk this earth. For clarification, she stayed in my life. Just my grandparents raised me. There was a lot of other drama as well, but none of it worth getting into. Story 9. So my grandmother, who's been estranged from my family for a long time now for a multitude of reasons, has this weird thing where she has to share food with people. Are you ordering steak at the restaurant? Well, oh boy, she's got to order the same thing even if she doesn't like steak. Try her drink. It's really good. Take the first bite of chicken to let her know if it's any good. This always really annoyed me because I hate sharing food. One day I brought it up to my mom and she was like, oh yeah, grandma's afraid of being harmed, so she wants other people to try it first. So let me get this straight. Grandma thinks someone is trying to harm her, so she has me try the food first? And it makes so much sense looking back because she literally would not take a bite of anything she ordered until someone else had a bite first. Thanks, Grandma. Story 10. Before I answer this, I want to say that this doesn't have my permission to leave here. To make sense, you have to know I have PTSD, and with it comes severe memory loss, in my case. With that being said, on to the answer. My mom sat me down and told me she walked in on my grandfather mistreating me. No one is sure when it stopped. I always felt off and had anxiety or depression, but as soon as she told me, she also explained it happened to her. She knew he was a monster, yet continued letting me be raised by him. I had all the symptoms growing up. I told people growing up I knew something was wrong, and people told me I was a dramatic girl or that I was a liar. He reoffended a few years ago. That's when people started to believe me. Honestly, it's rough, and spending your whole life being invalidated, invisible, and just really alone. I'm in my 30s and still am very just lost and feel completely hopeless. I'm not sure how to move on. I apologize for the ramble. I've never written out how I felt. It's weird reading it. I'll probably remove this because I want to continue to stay invisible, but I saw others in the forum share their stories. Story 11. Not so much a secret someone shared with me, but comments someone has made about a particular case in the Midwest US. All I'm going to say is that a family member very close to me has consistently every so often made comments about a particular case that happened in the region they grew up in. The culprits were caught, but I believe little to none were found, and through the investigation, it was discovered that the victims were fed. My family members' comments have always been vague and don't incriminate them in any way or add new information. Yet it has always unsettled me, not just because of the infrequent consistency in which they do it, but the serious or hushed tone they say it in that gives me the impression they could know more than they lead on. Be it first-hand or second-hand info. To be fair, rumors spread like crazy in rural America. Doesn't help that at the time of the crime, this relative of mine worked at a factory run by another family member, another interesting character, an ex-biker. He always enjoys everyone's discomfort when they go into detail about the process of various animals, including pigs, usually at the dinner table. Anyway, this person has always been into true crime, and I don't think many crimes happen in the region they grew up in, which could explain their fascination. I just can't help but shake the feeling they know something and sort of want to share it someday. Maybe I'll prod next time I see them. Story 12. This may not be the most popular answer, but my elderly mother in another state would lie to me about her health and well-being. I always kept close tabs because she was in her 80s and everything appeared to be fine, till I got a call from her friend who filled me in on what was really happening. A lot of bad health stuff, it turns out. Long story short, ended up in assisted living, ultimately, as she needed it. I hear this happens a lot, as the elderly don't want to be put in a home, but in her case, she was literally on the verge of accidentally injuring herself. So, while it's unfortunate to have to go to assisted living, if she truly wanted to live as long as possible, it was necessary. And the place was quite nice anyway. Moral of this story, if your loved ones are elderly, do more than just take their word on how they're really doing if you're able. Story 13. Discovered that my own mother paid bribes to my then social services worker to make my life miserable. I was in foster care at a young age because she was mistreating me. I won't get into the details. I was under the state's protection, but suddenly got imprisoned without any reason. I had to endure other forms of mistreatment or revenge as well. Finally got a lawyer. He found all the evidence and got in court. She lost the small amount of legal custody she still had. The social services worker got fired and banned from his profession, and I got my emancipation. The judge was not amused. I'm 41 and she still tries to make my life miserable once in a while, even if I move. Can't wait for her to just end and live in peace. Story 14. Probably not the most disturbing thing in this thread, but I recently learned that my brothers and I are the product of our father's second family. Apparently, he had a first family and my mother lured him away from them. His firstborn son was his name Junior, and he apparently passed away in the 90s, about 10 years after he started a family with my mother. The guy I knew as my righteous and morally sound beacon in life straight up ditched his family for a new woman to start a new family. He never spoke to them again. I'll never look at my parents the same again. My older brother and I have gotten closer since finding out, which is cool, but it's so disturbing to me how much we were lied to. I'm really wanting to do a DNA test to see if I have any long-lost half-siblings or cousins. Story 15. In high school, I had a friend who I wasn't close with for long, maybe a semester, but we bonded over our mental health struggles at the time. Unfortunately, she ended it all, not long later, and it wasn't until years later I learned from her best friend what she was really going through. Her parents divorced because her father came out and she left with her father because she was also the same as him and her family had become hostile towards them. Her own brother spray-painted words in their home and messed with their tires. She also had health issues that contributed to her depression, and one day, she had enough. Almost a year to the day she passed away, her brother also ended it all, presumably out of guilt. I was told the family was investigated, but the last I heard, her mother had started speaking at prevention events. Story 16. My best friend of 25 years confessed to me that they believed themselves to be a sociopath, but they said it like they were proud, followed by a joyous, I don't give a care about anyone but myself. I immediately recoiled and began begging them to not believe that, and tried to cough up examples of the contrary. Over the next year or two, things got especially chaotic in our world, and I began to step back and observe them more closely. Over time, I realized that they were right. They dated and brought around the worst people imaginable, people that would try to ruin your life and turn all your friends against you if you expressed disapproval. After a mountain range of covert passive-aggressive treatment, one day I woke up to who they really were and moved them out of my life immediately. Bear in mind, there was a long, slow build-up to this. There was a spell of healing, which is still ongoing, and lots of holy cow moments in retrospect, but things have been great ever since. Story 17. My extended family on my mom's side has a strange practice of turning horrible family events into funny stories to tell at family gatherings and the like. I believe mostly as a way to deal with the trauma. The time my grandfather tried to harm my grandmother in their living room with the kids present, or when my mom got harmed for saying Billy D. Williams was hot, were among those stories, both of which were told at Christmas parties, even when I was very young. The only stuff that doesn't get turned into fun stories is the stuff that no one knows how to process and just wants to bury. And that stuff I've only gotten tiny glimpses at, probably for the best. The one that stands out is when my grandmother let slide that my grandfather was in a group and participated in lynchings and was really proud of how good he was at it. Or when I found out later in life that the only reason I saw him growing up when none of my cousins did was that he knew where my mom lived but not his other kids. That us not visiting wasn't an option, which did make sense, considering his house and everything that happened in it was, in retrospect, weird. Like hanging out with the mute grandkids of his new wife. Story 18. My mom traveled back to China to have a cancellation, and my parents hoped that I was too young to remember, but I did. Back then, I remember my mom visiting the doctor numerous times, getting ultrasounds taken and such, and she went back to China for several months, leaving just my dad and I in the US, and after she came back, she never talked about it. I asked her where's the little sister that was supposed to be born, and they just said something like she disappeared. When I was a teen and I learned about different things, I started to suspect she might have had a cancellation. I asked her about it and she denied it, saying it never happened and I might be imagining things. Classic gaslighting. Only recently, over 30 years later, I asked my uncle about it and he told me it was all real and she did get a cancellation because his sister and my grandma helped take care of her after. We lived in a very conservative state and my parents were poor immigrants living off of my dad's measly grad school stipend and couldn't afford the procedure anyways. As for why they got the cancellation, the baby had tons of birth defects and wasn't going to make it anyways. Story 19. Finally, I can post this story in one of these. So, my now husband, engaged at the time, and I are teachers and did a couple-year stint in bush or rural Alaska. It was pretty intense, but a great adventure. Learned a lot we wanted and a lot we didn't. We befriended one of our colleagues, an older single man who seemed friendly enough. We would often go over for dinner and go hiking. He took on the role of an uncle figure for us. We stayed at his Airbnb or spare bedroom at his house in the city on vacation once too. Now, in her second year teaching, there he brings along this young woman at the start of the school year who claims is his niece, and she never leaves his house. He claimed she was having trouble living with his brother and she was taking classes online to graduate, and she confirmed this with myself and other women in the village. Fast forward to spring. She leaves for home separately from this man and people ask why. He claims she patched things up with his brother or her dad and went home. It turns out this girl was basically a girl he met online, and her father tracked her down after she contacted the local woman about her situation and sent a state trooper to escort her home. She had been reported missing for 8 months prior. Messed up part was, on top of going to court for that situation starting the following summer, he tried to coax another girl offline to live with him the following school year, and it turns out that entire chat history was a sting by the FBI. He's in prison now, until 2043. Anyways, if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 20. My best friend in high school had a brother who was only a year older than her. I wasn't close friends with him or anything, but I always liked him when we were younger, in a friendly way. He was always goofy and seemed kind-hearted, even though he did consistently stay in trouble as a teen. He has had a serious drinking problem ever since middle school. I knew he had some problems, but I never thought he was a bad guy. Well, anyway, I lost touch with my friend for a few years after high school, but when we ran into each other a while back, we had a long catch-up session. While talking, I couldn't help but notice that she hadn't mentioned her brother at all. That is odd, considering that he has always been present in her life. So I asked about him. Apparently, her brother had mistreated someone when he was in his mid-20s. The boy's family found out about it and pressed charges against him. I was absolutely shocked. I knew he had some serious emotional issues, and I knew he had been dealing with misuse, but I never thought he would do something like that. At most, I imagined him being in and out of jail for random petty charges, or maybe even go to prison for a crime. I never thought this was the direction his life would take. A friend said that she thinks his issues make it extremely difficult to have healthy relationships with people his own age, that he feels safer socializing with people much, much younger. She told me that after the charges were pressed, he was an absolute wreck, as if he were going through a breakup with another adult. It wasn't the charges that bothered him. It was the fact that he seriously considered this kid to be his boyfriend and he didn't want to lose him. Not that this makes anything he did less messed up. It was just shocking to me to hear just how warped this guy I grew up with was, and I never knew it. All this time you think you know a guy. Story 21. Growing up, I had an estranged sister from my dad's first marriage, but never knew why she left. I was always told vague things. When my brother passed away, a relative went out of their way to contact her and invite her to the funeral. She called the house, and my father got on the phone with her in private. When he came out of the room, he said he was done with her and told her she had been mean to him on the phone and wasn't coming to the funeral. I was upset and angry because I wanted to meet my sister and I couldn't believe she would do something like that to my grieving father. Fast forward, I'm visiting a relative in Ireland, the same relative who had reached out to my sister way back when. We were drinking at a bar, and she let it slip that she was with my sister the day when she made the phone call, and it was my father who was mean to her. It made her cry in the coffee shop. She had her bags packed to go to her brother's funeral, and she didn't go back because of my dad. I literally saw red. Still haven't spoken to my sister, but my father now has 2 estranged children. Story 22. I discovered later on in life that a close family member of mine was mistreated by the older brother of my best friend, literally in the same room next to me. I was still young. I didn't know until later when I read an interview that said person has, and she explained the story. And the grim reality struck me that this act was happening literally feet from me, behind a closed door, while I played Final Fantasy VII. I called her up and told her how I recalled it and how terrible I felt. Silver lining, she was happy someone remembered the events leading up to it because she had half convinced herself it was partially made up, and so she never named names. To this day, she's not accused him because of the close ties between both families, but yeah. So when folks whine about, why don't women report, please consider the many reasons why someone may choose not to air it. To say do not associate with this person anymore is an understatement. Story 23. I have almost zero interaction with my wider family. They're worthless to me. I only keep my mom and dad and one brother close. The rest are schmuck or have no interest in me. I've learned the hard way not to trust people and lost money, time, or mental freedom on them. No more. I don't mind losing touch with them. They're worthless to me and allowed terrible things to happen to my father, their brother. And when my grandfather passed, they allowed the poor treatment to continue even though they knew it was spiteful because he was a stepson and only their half-brother. All the money my step-granddad had and the house he owned was gifted to my grandmother to look after my father by his true family. She passed away when I was young. All the money was left to her husband. When he passed away, in the will all the grandkids got money and all the sons and daughters got money apart from my family because we weren't related, even though the money was meant for us. It didn't work. He lived off that money. The house was paid for. It wasn't paid by him. It was all the money left for my father and his mother to care for him. Then they reached out to say, let bygones be bygones. Nope. You perpetuated hate and the money you took was left by my father's real family to look after him. Your father was just a usurper and stole my father's inheritance. That's terrible. His grandmother should never have left the money to her husband. People forget that money corrupts and her husband was not her son's father. Story 24. A friend told me she had a history of being mean, as well as meddling in marriages. She claimed she was young and immature and past it. Then she started dating a friend, and I got to witness elements of her attitude firsthand. Tried to protect the dude, tried to talk to him about it, but he'd hear none of it. Full denial of being mistreated, because it hadn't gotten worse at that point. Then she started meddling in the marriage of another friend while still in this relationship. In addition, uncomfy moments with me that the culmination of these things made me realize there's a good chance that she may be an actual sociopath. What disturbed me was the complete lack of remorse and the level of manipulative control she had over others, men in particular. Story 25. My father cheated on my brother's mother with my mom. My mom didn't know. They married and had me on the first year anniversary of being married. He started cheating on my mom with multiple women. And even when he was visiting my mom, my grandma, on her end from cancer, he met up with some women to mess around with. While my mother and I went back to our homestay while he buried his mother. After he left my mom, he remarried in Mexico with someone who was the same age as my brother. First marriage. He passed away in 2011 of a heart emergency in the freeway. Managed to park himself while having it. My brother and I had to pick up his stuff and we looked through his phone. And can you guess it? He was cheating on his current wife who lived in Mexico. The names in those phone numbers were for his boss, lawyer, and some other names. We looked through those messages and were not surprised. So we did him one final solid and erased everything from his phone. This man was a player till he passed. Scumbag, yes, but his past, from what I heard, was pretty bad. But I think that is for another post. Story 26. A lot to unpack with this one. But when I was in high school, I discovered my father's stash of DVDs, and honestly, I would have kept quiet about it had it not been mostly extreme. Anyway, this opened a giant can of worms. My mother confronted him, and it turned out that he'd been having random meetups with men and women for the last 10 years. Think that's all? Nope. One of those meetups was his own cousin who had a serious drinking problem. He then used that meetup to blackmail the man into giving him money for years. There was absolutely no reason to do this. My dad had a fantastic job, which paid great money. Am I finished? Nope. My parents obviously split up, and then my dad became quite sick very shortly afterwards. Turns out he had AIDS, which he contracted years prior, HIV, and knew about it all that time. Everyone in my family had to be tested, including my younger brother who was only still young at the time. Thankfully, and most unbelievably, we all tested negative, including my mom. Surely I'm finished now. Nope. My dad met another woman and relapsed. Started drinking and doing stuff again, lost his job, eventually lost the house he was staying in with her and became homeless. Like living on the street type homeless. And just one more thing. When they broke up, her daughter told her that my father had been mistreating her. We all stood behind the family and gave statements, etc. to the police. This led to my brother also finding the courage to tell us that our dad also mistreated him for a number of years. His laptop and phone were seized and images were found on them. And you know where he is now? Well, neither do we. The police literally knew where he was and was ready to make an arrest, but decided not to because it's a Sunday. That was a few years ago, and he's been hiding ever since. On the outside, this man was a professional guy with a great job. Always very caring and charming, people loved him, and yet he's the biggest monster I've ever known. Hopefully he's miserable. Story 27. My soon-to-be ex-husband lied about having cancer twice. He did it to cover for affairs. The first time, he guilted me, saying he had to leave town for treatment because I was too weak to be able to handle it and he needed his strength to stop cancer, not take care of me. I hated myself for being weak. Turns out he was really just out of town messing around with someone else while I was home being a single mom for 6 months. He duped all our friends, family. He even told his boss that he had days to weeks to live. I have texts to a friend of his talking about being sick from chemo, but the dates lined up to when we were at a hotel together having a romantic long weekend together. He didn't tell me the cancer returned till a month later, but he's never had cancer, never even tested for possible cancer. He let me, our children, our families and friends all cry, worried, etc. over his diagnosis, and it was a scam. Twice. I'll never get over that pain. It was unbearably cruel. Story 28. All right, this is going to be a long one, and a lot of context is needed, along with some ugly things I learned along the way. So about 6 to 7 years ago, I was in a difficult situation with housing. I live in a city where housing is prohibitively expensive and in demand, and I just found out that the letting agency was renovating the place and moving me and my former flatmate, whom I hated, out. Posted looking for new flatmates, and this guy asked to meet me to see if he could sort something out. I know this guy from anime cons. Seldom a good start, I know. And I chatted with him a couple of times and had a few drinks with him. We were friends on Facebook. He had been good friends with great friends of mine. We sat down for some Chinese food and talked. He proceeds to tell me that he has dissociative episodes, wakes up not knowing where he has been or what he's done. He says that he once woke up with red liquid in his hands and no idea how he got there. I smile and say something like, "Yeah, that's not ideal, man." While internally I'm like, I'm absolutely not moving in with this guy. Fast forward a few weeks and several of my friends make reference to an incident that happened at an anime con with this guy, but absolutely refuse to go into any kind of detail. There is apparently an ongoing investigation. I'm not really surprised, given the specimen, but a few years go by before I get a message from someone else I know telling me that I should unfriend this guy because he's just been convicted at an anime con in the side room and sentenced. Suddenly it all becomes clear. My mutual friends opened up to me. They'd known this guy since their early teens and they had been really close. When the event happened, he had told them that the girl had been making it all up and that he was innocent. They had, cautiously, wanted to believe their friend until it went to trial. So they said nothing during the investigation to anyone besides the authorities. They attended the trial and were horrified when absolutely incontrovertible evidence of his guilt was produced. It seems the girl he harmed wasn't even his intended target, but his target was in fact a girl one of my friends was dating at the time, whom he believed was leading him on after a prolonged dry spell. I don't know the victim, but I can only imagine the ordeal she went through. Needless to say, finding out that one of their best friends from their teens was a criminal also really messed up my friends. It gave me a first-hand view of how traumatic, messy, and complicated stuff like this can be. One girl who knew him, who said he couldn't believe he would do such a thing, received anonymous threats afterwards because they thought she was denying his guilt. He's in jail now and deserves to be. Stuff like this also brings out some of the worst in other people, too. Story 29. A friend of mine slept with her boyfriend's best friend when extremely intoxicated, and I think her third child is his, not the boyfriend's. Her and her boyfriend have 2 kids together, and this third kid looks like the boyfriend's friend, not the boyfriend. The first 2 kids have brown eyes and hair like both parents. The third is blue-eyed and ginger like the other guy. She's a childhood friend, and I would rarely see her. When she told me what happened, I did encourage her to tell her boyfriend. She told me while she was heavily pregnant, so I think she realized it was a possibility. It definitely was one time. She didn't imply it was forced or anything, but she used to be the kind of person who couldn't control their drinking and would end up in these situations as a teen. From what I heard of the situation, they were both incredibly hammered, though. The reason I haven't said anything is because they have kind of a weird relationship as it is. I don't know him that well, and I don't feel like it would help anything. They're dating, but they don't act like a couple, and they don't live together, and her boyfriend doesn't really provide for the 2 confirmed kids anyway. He was making a lot of money while my friend only had holy clothes to wear or was struggling to get by. I'm not really sure why they're in a relationship, but they are. It's public in his profile, too. Around the time the third baby was born, the boyfriend's dad also passed away. I don't think her boyfriend cheats, it's just a weird relationship. Although I'm very against cheating, I kind of feel like it's not really my place to rock the boat. Nothing is confirmed paternity-wise, and I'm not in contact with either of them in real life for the past few years. But every time I see that child, I remember her telling me what happened. Story 30. My archenemy in middle school was the daughter of a priest that worked for the school we attended. We absolutely disliked each other. My mother arranged for a sleepover with her, hoping we could work out our differences if we were one-on-one outside of school. I have no idea why she told me her family secret, but she did. That night, she told me her older brother and sister were intimate, and her parents caught them. They said they were in love and wanted to be together, so their father secretly married them to protect them from sin. She and I went on to continue our bad relationship that lasted until graduation, but I never told her secret. Allie, I hope you're living your best life away from your messed up family, even if you're mean. Story 31. While I was drinking with my grandparents last year, I mentioned how weird it was that my aunt had all this Christian or Jesus stuff going on. I noticed she had a hoodie that said, "Choose Christ," or something like that, and it confused me. My aunt and uncle are both pretty traditional secular. Then my grandma slipped up and said, "Oh, she got baptized after she ran over that man." The cat was out of the bag. My aunt apparently ran over an intoxicated guy on Halloween. He and his friends were jumping out in front of cars while dressed up, just to scare people in the spirit of the holiday. She couldn't press the brakes fast enough. There was a huge prejudice element involved afterwards because she got off without any charges as a white woman. The man was a Pacific Islander, and they fought hard for justice and never got it. Yeah, it's a messed up situation, and I feel horrible for both parties, and I love my aunt so much, but yeah, it was a dark family secret which was kept from me. Story 32. This isn't exactly disturbing, but equally as shocking. Throughout the time I knew my great-grandfather, up until around primary school when he passed, he never, ever talked about his time in the military. I was in World War I as a young boy, lied about his age, so fair enough. We knew he served. He was in a wheelchair due to wounds that he received, but that was about the extent of it. He never, ever spoke of it. Then when he passed, my parents were helping sort through his stuff and found a Victoria Cross, highest British military award for gallantry or bravery in the face of the enemy. They did some research and found out that my tiny, mild-mannered great-grandfather was at the Battle of the Somme, went over the top, and as he looked back to check on his mate, he got harmed. At the same time, his mate was harmed too. My great-grandfather crawled back to the British trenches, dragging his friend along. Both survived. He received a VC for this. However, he didn't even tell his wife, kids, or grandkids, etc. I guess he just didn't want the fanfare or praise over doing something anyone, or most people, would do for their friend. And he just didn't want to have to relive anything to do with that war. The lads back then were made of different stuff to people today, I swear. Story 33. Not a secret anymore, but still a story worth telling. My paternal grandmother passed away recently, and it just so happened to be the same day as my cousin's wedding. Mom's side. By some insane stroke of luck, my siblings both left for the wedding earlier than me and her parents, and my mom got the news while my siblings were gone. So I was told it happened, and then told I had to keep it a secret for the day so I didn't ruin the wedding. Fair enough. Well, during the reception, one of the guests, I believe someone's grandfather, started having some kind of episode and an ambulance had to be called. At first, we thought it could be a stroke, but thankfully it turned out to be low sugar, which is fairly easily taken care of. But anyway, while we were waiting for the ambulance to arrive and for the EMTs to do their thing, I'd gone out back to get a drink somewhere quiet. And my brother came to the same area a bit later. We talked a bit and he ended up saying, "Wouldn't it be crazy if he actually passed away? Like, how weird would that be to happen today of all days?" I just couldn't say anything in response.
What family secret was finally spilled in your family? My grandma didn't drive. I thought she couldn't, but it was just never discussed. One day when I was maybe 7 to 8, I had been trying to get anyone, to drive me to the store for candy. We were visiting my aunt and uncle. Grandma lived with them. They had Bit-O Honey at the local store, which I could no longer get at home, but no one would take me to the store. Finally, I said to just ask Grandma, and my cousin chimes in with, "Grandma can't drive." "Oh, you bet your sweet bum I can drive. They just don't let me." Grandma had overheard, and she was in high dudgeon. But that's all there was said about it, and my aunt finally took me to the store, so I forgot about it. Years later, when I just got my license, I asked my mom what was up with Grandma not driving. She explained that during Prohibition, Grandma bootlegged alcohol. She was very successful at it. She was so successful at it that when they were finally busted, even though the revenuers never caught my grandma, her license was suspended by the state to never be reissued. Later in life, she was told she could petition for it back, but it came with an admission of guilt or some such. She told them to go to hell. Story 2. My aunt was my grandfather's child. I met my granny when my aunt was a very sick infant. She had polio and wasn't expected to survive. My granddad married my granny so she could get on his insurance and move on to an area that had proper medical support. My aunt was the first infant to survive open heart surgery at Yale New Haven Hospital. And although she had to be in leg braces most of her childhood, she had a great, although not long enough, life. My granddad loved her like she was his own, and I never knew until she went to her bio-dad's funeral when I was a teenager. Story 3. After my grandfather passed, we found out he had fathered a child and he was posted in Italy during World War II. Never knew. His mother intercepted any letters from the Italian girl. He came home, met, and married my grandmother and had 4 children. I forget who in the family found out and how. It's crazy to think we have a whole Italian family out there. Story 4. I started having problems with my teeth. Spontaneous abscess that resulted in multiple root canals. My dentist did some looking into what the cause might be and found some really odd abnormalities with my incisors, roots, and nerves, the teeth that had been afflicting me, so he sent out requests for help to a couple of professors he knew in the field. When my next appointment came up, he was really quiet for a bit before verbally stumbling about. It turns out that what was happening with my teeth was a classic sign of inbreeding, and he was super uncomfortable giving me the news. I brought it up to my mom, and she was just like, "Oh, well, yeah. Didn't you know?" What the heck? Of course I didn't know. Turns out that not very far back in the family tree, several of my relatives decided that it was a good idea to get married to one another, and no one bothered to mention it, ever. The small town where I live is 85% my relatives. No joke. I hadn't even met all of them. That's how many there are. Story 5. That my grandfather was an atomic soldier. Instead of sending him to fight in the Korean War, they sent him to Nevada, where after having him turn away from the initial flash, he witnessed the mushroom cloud. After that was over, he was ordered to march to the detonation point where he was unwittingly exposed to high amounts of radiation. Luckily for my family, my grandpa is now in his 90s, even after a few cancer scares. And the rest of us, my mom, aunt, cousins, sister, and I, are cancer-free and fairly healthy. But this is medical information that we really should have known earlier. Story 6. After my mom passed away, I found out the real story behind my parents' marriage. She came to my father's country to visit some of her relatives, met my father, and after just 1 week, she asked him to marry her so she could stay in the country. My father accepted because he had no one else and his parents were pressing him to get married already. But the highlight of the story is that over some time, the two of them fell in love with each other. Their love only grew over time and they were really happy together. My mother spent her last days very ill and she would accept only my father by bedside. He swears to this day that she was an angel sent from God to take care of him. I'm shocked that they got married just like that, out of the blue, and ended up loving each other so deeply. I can only hope to have as good and loving marriage as they had. Story 7. My dad fathered a child in high school. His side of the family knew, and my mom. We found out years after he passed away that we have a half-sister. Okay, buckle up. I've recounted this story before, but this comment resonated. Here's how we found out. Dad got a girl pregnant and she decided to go it alone. She moved across the state and had my half-sister. She met a guy, married, and he raised her like she was his own. They had no other children. She didn't reveal my dad's identity until after he passed away. Apparently, she contacted my grandma and mom, but they kept it from us. Years later, half-sister has a kid with medical issues and needs to know family medical history. She contacts mom and grandma, who, again, don't tell us. Meanwhile, after Dad passed away, my uncle had prints made of a favorite picture of Dad. He gets them framed and gives them to all his kids, as well as my grandma, aunts, and uncles. Mom gets a picture of her half-sister after the secret meeting. Fast forward another few years. My brother and his roommate lived in a nearby large city and hit a bar and pick up and bring home some ladies to sleep over. The next morning, my half-sister sees a photo of my dad on the mantle, turns wide and asks, "Whose picture is that?" "That's my roommate's dad. He passed away a long time ago." "I need to talk to your roommate. She lived her entire life across the state, hundreds of miles. Her friend was going to school in a large city near her hometown. She was visiting, and they decided to go to a bar. They got picked up by my brother and his roommate. That's how we found out. My brother went to my grandma and asked about her, and Grandma first denied it, then gave in and spilled the beans. Small world. Story 8. I met my wife when my daughter was 16 months old. Bio dad was never in the picture. Once it was looking like a relationship that would last, we got married and briefly toyed with the idea of just never telling her. She was around 3 to 4 at this time. Ultimately, we decided that it would be better not to hide it. Though that has created some issues with her now half-siblings and some self-esteem issues. I just felt that her potentially finding this out as an adult might be pretty traumatizing and messed up. It's a pretty big lie of omission, and I just wasn't comfortable with it. Also as important, I believe, for medical history-related things she'll encounter later in life. Lastly, it gives Biodad the chance to do an about-face. Perhaps as unlikely as that may be, and get to know his daughter without the massive trauma of an unspoken lie being brought into play. To ease into it, at around 4 years old, I started saying things to her like, "After I met you and Mommy," and "This insert situation happened before I met you and Mommy." She was able to put 2 and 2 together as time progressed, so it wouldn't have been a sit-down confession, but rather a more evolutionary realization which we guided her through. Story 9. My mother often had stories like, "At your age, we got up at 4 a.m. to work on the farm. After the job, we went home to have lunch with your grandfather, then we walked 10 kilometers to go to school, and when we were back, we used to work in the field in a tractor until it was 6 p.m. to go and cook dinner for your grandfather." And I was like, "Yeah, but he didn't work the farm with you in the morning?" And she was changing the subject. I learned in Easter that my grandfather was a drinker. Got intoxicated every night, then get up in the morning to go to work or was in fake jobs to lie to the family and go to drink, while the children had to go in elementary school and manage a farm. Then he was in prison because he touched the neighbor's children. When he got out of prison, he took out a loan of $30,000 in my grandmother's name and ran away with the money. Then he passed away a few years later. My grandmother brought herself a used Ford LTD and no one cried at the funeral. 30 years later, I learned who my grandfather was. Story 10. When I was 28, I found out that my dad was not my biological father. The news came out via the following. My dad was battling depression, so I just flown home to try to take care of him and rescue him from my mom's wrath. My mom had verbally and emotionally mistreated him during their entire relationship. He loved her so much, and he tolerated it. Well, during a solemn walk with my dad as I tried to help him out, he confided that he's not my biological dad. He went on to tell me he knew this all along, but my mom lied to him and tried to convince him that he was my biological father. He knew he wasn't, but he wanted to play the role. When I was 10 years old, my mom finally confessed this to him, and he was so worried that upon hearing the news officially, he'd somehow let this affect his relationship with me. So when I was 28 years old, during this walk with my dad, as he pours out this story to me, he frames it by telling me that his 2 most proud items in his life are, number 1, how I turned out, or his raising me. Number 2, that he had completely forgot about the news my mom told him earlier in that day, when I was 10, about him not being my biological father, and it was only upon tucking me in at night, when I was 10, that it briefly crossed his mind. It was at that point that he knew nothing would ever come between us, and our father-son relationship would be as awesome as ever. He also confided that my mom did substances while pregnant with me, and this broke his heart to witness firsthand. They were very poor. My dad grew up in a foster home without parents. My mom grew up with 6 siblings and ill-equipped parents. She dropped out of 9th grade, whereas all of her other siblings dropped out earlier. Many of them are barely literate. I'm now mid-30s, and tragically, my dad ended it all mid-March 2020. I was out of the country at the time, but immediately flew 30 hours, 30-minute layover, and made it in time for his funeral. I do everything in his honor. Story 11. Last week, I discovered that my dad passed away 2 years ago, and no one bothered to tell me. I've been looking for him. It was something off a drifter and most likely had Asperger's. I'm his only child. I stumbled across his headstone on findagrave.com while digging through Ancestry. His marker was labeled Beloved Brother. My aunts and uncles are pieces of crap. I'm not hard to find. I don't even know how he passed away. He passed away alone, though. VA paid for his burial. I'm not okay. Story 12. I see a lot of stories about people finding out that who they thought was their parents weren't the people raising them, and this one is a little bit different. My dad always thought his father who raised him wasn't his bio dad, and the father thought the same. He was treated terribly by his father because the father was told he couldn't have children, and my father was born prematurely, but at a healthy weight. So everyone assumed my grandmother had an affair and got pregnant with my dad. It was to the point that after my grandmother passed away, my grandfather failed to even mention to his new wife that he had a son and grandchild, me. Years later, my dad gets an ancestry DNA test for him and me. He finds out that his dad was actually his bio dad. It was shocking and sad. Story 13. My uncle served in Vietnam. Well, over there, his troop found a baby that had been orphaned or abandoned. They weren't sure. My uncle was shipping back to Australia soon and wanted to adopt him, but my aunt said no. They'd only been married about 4 months when he was drafted, so while I don't agree with my aunt's actions and generally don't like her as a person, I can understand why she said no. My uncle's troop found a family to raise the baby, and that's the story the whole family knows. The secret is that my uncle and some other guys from his troop stayed in contact with the family and the kid, sending them money every month to help raise him and then to help him go to university, and eventually helped him and his adoptive family move to Australia in the late 90s. My aunt and the rest of the family had no idea all this time. It only came out when my aunt and uncle divorced in 2017 and she had a forensic accountant go through their bank records. She worked at a bank for like 40 years and always noticed the money missing, but his reasons were always justified. Since we all know now, my uncle has introduced some of us to the guy and his family. They're all really lovely people. Story 14. I grew up in a Mexican family and have 2 younger cousins. My aunt married another Latino guy who basically looked white. The oldest child was a girl and came out looking exactly like her dad. Full stop. The second was a boy and came out looking like his mom, maybe? He was dark. Like I'm half black and this kid is darker than me. But his mom was pretty brown as well, so we thought nothing of it. Kid looks like his mom. Well, fast forward 16 years later, they're divorced and hate each other. The daughter was always treated like a princess. The boy was rather spoiled too, but very much sought out his dad's approval, which she just wasn't getting. He couldn't figure out why. He's acting out, getting in trouble, running with gangs, boo-hoos about his dad all the time. Well, Dad had enough and flat out told him, "You're not my kid. Your mom is a witch and I don't know who your dad is." He even was kind enough to offer up a paternity test. His mother never said crap about it. She took the ostrich approach and hoped it would go away. We now know his dad was a Pacific Islander, and while there is one who has always been a family friend for many years, he took a paternity test too and was completely cleared. So the mystery remains in who she cheated on her ex with. She says she doesn't even know. Story 15. My de facto uncle, he and my aunt never married but have been together since well before I was born, with a few hiccups, has a child with another woman. It became common knowledge when the girl was 6 and was starting to understand the situation. At first it was a bit scandalous, but she's been welcomed with open arms by my entire family, including her half-siblings as maternal grandparents. She's treated the same as all the other kids her age. Her half-sister and my cousin has a daughter the same age and they're best friends. Go to the same high school, totally inseparable. Technically aunt and niece. She comes to all our family events and she's an awesome kid. We're all stoked to have her in our family. Story 16. After my mom's passing, my grandfather revealed that when she was in her teens, she accused him of mistreating her right around the time he started cheating on his wife, her mother. It led to them not speaking for years until they reconciled, and she allowed him to meet me and my brother. We always knew they had a falling out, but didn't know why. Anyways, a few months after telling me, my grandpa drove a tractor out into the woods on his property and passed away. He'd suffered a stroke a few years prior that left him mostly paralyzed on one side, and he really struggled with it. Anyways, I came to realize that either my grandfather mistreated my mother and was never really brought to justice for it, or my mom was a liar to spite him. And honestly, both are legitimate possibilities, and I'll never know what's true. C'est la vie. Story 17. My mother had a child when she was a teenager, and she'd given him up for adoption to a family. After this, she went to college, got her degree, married my father, and gave birth to my 4 siblings and myself. Around 30 years after giving her child up for adoption, I remember her getting a phone call and immediately locking herself in a room. I was about 12 at the time. I remember feeling scared because I could hear my mom crying, but she didn't want to see anybody or talk about why she was crying. On an evening, later that week, a parent sat each of us kids down and told us about my mom's past and explained that my half-brother had reached out to my mom wanting to meet her and get to know her. My dad had known ever since he and my mom were dating in college, and I believe my oldest sister had been told previous to this point. But the rest of my siblings and myself and all the in-laws on my dad's side, my grandma, aunts, and uncles, etc., didn't know about this part of her past. We're fairly religious or conservative, so it was really shocking at first. Mom then flew out to the state where my half-brother lived with her sisters and met him. Both my mom and my half-brother were both very nervous about the whole thing, but by the end of their trip, meeting each other, they got to rebuild a relationship. After a bit of time, my siblings and I, got to meet him too. Fast forward to now. He's since moved to our same state, and we see him much more frequently. He's in all of our family pictures. We see him occasionally for holidays and birthdays, and we all see him as part of our family. We're a very close-knit and extroverted family, while he's much shyer, so at times he can be a bit more distant than we would like, but we give him his space. I know my mom stays in close touch with him, and we love it when he's able to make it for family dinners and whatnot. Back then, I was the youngest, and up until then, the only boy in my family, so I loved learning that I had an older brother. Now that I'm an adult, I sometimes get his old clothes because they're roughly the same size. He's got good taste too, so I really lucked out. I love that this family secret was spilled and that we were able to welcome my brother into our family and have him in our lives. Story 18. My father passed away when I was 17. At the funeral home during a viewing, a young lady and her boyfriend showed up. She was probably 2 or 3 years older than me. Nobody recognized her, so she was asked why she was there. She stated she was there to see her father. My siblings and I are naturally confused. Her mom is just standing there shaking her head. My uncles ask her to leave. She leaves crying in her boyfriend's arms. Our mother takes us to a private area and explains our father had an affair years ago, and that was our stepsister. I never heard any more about her, never learned her name, and have never met her. I would like to meet her and apologize to my family. Seeing her rejected and crying because she couldn't even attend a viewing for her father bothers me to this day. And this was over 40 years ago. Story 19. My dad's friend ended it all in front of my dad and some other friends when he was 15 years old. We were all hanging out at the friend's house having a good time when he went upstairs, grabbed his father's weapon, and came back down, calling everyone's attention. They all thought it was some sort of sick joke at first until they looked over the couch. I first heard this story from my mom when I was 18, which explained some of my dad's behaviors towards toy guns when I was a kid, but I never brought it up to him. I just hoped that one day he would open up to me about it, and eventually he did. But we haven't talked about it since then. I'm amazed how my dad had turned out to be such a great man, having to experience something awful like that at such a young age. But according to him, it's something that never left him either. He still has nightmares about it and gets really uneasy in movies and TV shows. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 20. When my paternal grandfather passed away, the federal government reached out to do a state funeral. He'd been a career Army and a colonel, so we didn't question it. Then the funeral came and they went all out. Huge procession. People showing up were really big names, like heads of departments, senators, retired senators, people from the CIA and State Department. It was nuts, and we were all super confused. Turns out he was a key dude in the OSI during World War II, and when the OSI splintered into the CIA and Secret Service, he went the Secret Service route. He wasn't on White House detail, but instead worked in a covert office that dealt with counterfeiting and currency. He went blind when I was a toddler and retired from the Army. For whatever reason, he told no one about all his covert work with the OSI and Secret Service, and the only person who knew, my grandmother, was sworn to secrecy and never told anyone. My father grew up thinking he was just a colonel working on base. Only after his passing were we given all sorts of cool crap like publications by him, lectures given by him, and all kinds of things from various things he did and was known for. All I knew him as was a blind old man who was perpetually smoking, drinking, and being a schmuck. Turns out he was a bad idiot and all, but none of us knew. Story 21. Oh, another one. My mom's side of the family are farmers. One particularly dry summer, we were playing around with fireworks in a pasture and accidentally lit it on fire. Luckily, there was an industrial hose attached to the wall nearby, and we were able to turn it on and douse the flames before it got out of control. I didn't tell anyone until 10 years later. When I came out to my parents and my aunt and uncle, my uncle, who farmed the land, burst out laughing and told us that it must have been not long after that he was at that property and obviously noticed the burned grass and askew hose. He put two and two together but didn't say anything because he figured kids were being kids. And we probably learned our lesson. Story 22. My mom cheating on my dad with my now stepfather. My parents divorced when I was really young, about 1 year old, so I don't remember anything about that. When I would ask as a curious kid why they split up, both said that they just fell out of love. I already had a feeling that this was not true because though my grandma and I knew the divorce was in 1996, but my mom and stepfather started dating in 1995. On my 18th birthday, my stepfather confessed to me in private that they had an affair all that time ago, and he still feels awful because it feels like he broke up that family. I told him that all is fine because everyone is happy now, and I already kind of knew it. Some years later, my stepmother told me that my mom actually kicked out my dad without telling him why. She just needed a break. Remember, she just had a newborn and my dad could barely see me at the beginning. My dad later found out through the landlord that my stepfather had moved in the house my dad rented with his wife, where his newborn daughter was living with a stranger. To this day, I don't know why my dad managed to overcome this without starting a huge fight. I never talked with my parents about it. Just once when my mom was having a rant about a neighbor who left her husband for another man, I told her to stop throwing rocks while sitting in a glass house. I hope you know what the saying means. She definitely does. Story 23. My grandfather actually just learned this before his passing in 2017. He was given his middle name after his mother's father, and he had always signed his name proudly with his middle initial. Shortly before he passed away, he learned that his own grandfather had gone missing for a decade of his life. Turns out he was in prison for mistreating his daughters. My great-grandmother knew about this and passed along her father's name to her son anyway. My grandfather didn't get the chance to legally drop his middle name before he passed away, but he stopped signing with his middle initial. I was planning to pass down my grandfather's middle name to one of my children, but I never got the chance and regretted it. I'm glad I didn't know. My grandfather was a good man, but I don't care to pass down anything like that. Story 24. I think I've shared this on Reddit before, but whatever. Everyone knew my great-grandpa had cheated on his wife, my great-grandma, numerous times, but we never knew if he had legitimate children or not. My great-grandma passed away first, and he followed about a year later. Their only living child was the executor of their estate, and she noticed a lot of names, like 20, listed as specifically excluded from their estate. All of them had to be notified by the executor. They passed away very wealthy and had taken in foster children when my great-aunt was young, so she recognized almost all of the names. They excluded the foster children because they didn't want them entitled to any of their belongings. The name she didn't recognize turned out to be my great-grandpa's son from an affair. After doing some research, she was able to locate his mother and notify her that he was excluded from their estate. My great-aunt figured that the son didn't know that they were half-siblings and she didn't want to be the one to tell him. It turned out she was right, and the mother never told her son. Apparently, he still believes that his stepfather was his biological father. The craziest part? The illegitimate son had 2 daughters that ended up going to high school with my brother. Story 25. My parents used to grow grass in the basement when my siblings were little. I was a baby at the time, or possibly not born. The secret came out when my dad sent a photo of my sister standing happily in front of a bunch of grass plants. She asked about it in an email, but he ignored it. My dad told me all about it, though. Apparently, he was between jobs and was visiting family in California. One of his family members was growing it, so he ended up getting some cuttings and brought them back to New York. He hooked up some electrical wire so he could steal electricity off the power line without being detected, and so there wasn't a large power bill for the lights. They grew grass and tomatoes, which they told the kids what everything was. He'd sell it in bulk to some guy at an airport he flew at recreationally. He used that money to move to a new state and start a business there. Story 26. My cousin got married to her high school boyfriend. They had 2 children. They didn't come out they were cousins until the high school graduation party, their youngest. He was the child of the outcome of an ongoing affair between a farmer's wife and a farmer's farmhand, my great-uncle. My grandmother, same side of the family, had 14 children between 3 different husbands, or so we thought. It came out recently that she had given birth to 3 more children who were put up for adoption. One was the product of an affair between Grandma and the foreman of a lumberjack crew. She owned a bar, and the crew would come down from up north to get intoxicated every so often. Grandma got knocked up and told him on one of the visits. The next time he wasn't with the crew, they told her he had accidentally fallen. The reality was he already had a wife and kids. Grandma went on a vacation, had the baby, and gave her up for adoption. Didn't find out until my aunt did a DNA test. Story 27. Growing up, my twin cousins and I always played at family reunions and weddings. I asked why their dad was never there, and they talked about their dad being out of town all the time because he was a plumber. I was little, so I had no idea plumbers don't usually travel out of town for work. About 15 years later, I saw my uncle and twin cousins at a wedding after never really seeing him much before. However, there was something very militant about his behavior. I mentioned it to my grandma in passing that he had pretty crazy posture and was quite serious for a plumber. She looked at me bewildered and laughed at me. And that's when I learned Uncle Jeff is a retired CIA. Family alias? Plumber. Story 28. A very Catholic grandma and her very Catholic brother both had multiple children with their spouses, which included, by random chance, 1 gay son each. But them each being gay was a secret in each family and never spoken about. My family always suspected their cousin was gay, but never said anything for fear of outing them. My grandma was sure her brother would have a problem with his son being gay. Her brother was sure she would have a problem with her son being gay. One day when they were in their 30s, the secret broke with her brother confronting sister. I need to tell you, we think your son is gay. Oh, of course, we've known for decades, and I hate to be the one to tell you, but, your son is gay too, right? Oh yeah, we've always known. Turns out nobody in my very Catholic family had any issue with accepting their homosexuality, and everyone is supportive and keeping secrets for no reason. I just always thought it was funny they hid something everyone already knew for like 25 years. Story 29. My great-grandmother co-signed a loan for my father and mother to get a mobile home in a nice mobile home park for us to live in. However, because my mom sucks with money and my dad was too lazy to take control of the finances, he lost the mobile home because they couldn't pay the rent. My grandma's name was still in the loan for the trailer, so the finance company started drawing money out of her bank to make the payment to the mobile home we no longer had. The next week, my parents took us to the fair and we were confronted by my uncle because my great-grandma wasn't able to pay some of her bills because of what my parents did. I just don't know why my mom wouldn't pay the rent. I was about 5 years old at the time. I had no idea what was going on. I have a relationship with my parents now, but I just can't forgive my parents for that. My great-grandmother was the sweetest, kindest woman I've ever known. She did not deserve that. I miss you, Grandma. Story 30. 1 week before my younger sister's wedding, my dad decided to call myself, both my sisters, and my mother, his ex-wife, to meet at his house for something very important he needed to tell us. We all thought he had cancer or something. We were very worried. Once we were all there, he sobbingly confessed to having a 5-year-old son living in the town next to ours, which means the kid was conceived and born while my parents were still married. He claimed he didn't know for sure that the kid was his, and he had only recently gotten a DNA test. He showed us a picture of her half-brother. It looks exactly like my dad. My mother was devastated. Story 31. I have 2 secret child stories. My grandmother on my mom's side got pregnant at 16. She was forced to travel halfway across the country to give birth in secret and come back like it never happened. This secret came out before I was born. My grandmother and both of her children always wanted to find their other sibling, but were unable due to legal reasons. 6 or 7 years ago, my uncle got a phone call from the adopted child, but decided to look for his biological family after his adopted parents had passed away. Unfortunately, his biological mother, my grandmother, passed away in 2001. While he does still live halfway across the country, he's certainly a welcome part of our family now. Before lockdown, there were annual visits, but of course those had to stop for the time being. And a great-great-aunt on my dad's side. My dad's mother's brother's wife had also secretly given a child up as a teenager. 2 years ago, my great-great-uncle's birthday, his wife's adopted child was there. News to me and my dad, but of course, welcomed. The closer family had known about her for a while by that point. We're a big and relatively close family, but only saw the more distant relatives on special occasions. Unfortunately, a year later, my great-great-aunt passed away. It was sad, seeing the rest of her children sit up front at the funeral, with the adopted daughter sitting toward the back, and if my memory serves me correctly, not mentioned in the obituary. I wasn't really privy to the details. Maybe this was the way she wanted it. But I felt bad, seeing her hardly acknowledged at her biological mother's funeral. I had the feeling she wanted to be accepted and part of the family if she were attending birthday parties. Story 32. My grandfather passed away before I was born. He was a polygamist, had 8 wives simultaneously, and 42 children. Yes, he was Mormon. My grandmother left him when he eventually went to jail for it. Polygamy was illegal even back then. But Grandma stayed with the Mormon church. My parents turned away from the Mormon church when I was very young, so I was not raised Mormon. But my aunts, uncles, cousins, along with Grandma, were all still heavily involved with the church. Me and my siblings knew about our grandfather's history, but we were sworn to secrecy to never discuss it with the cousins. Fast forward a decade and a half, and it was so funny to see my adult cousins losing their freaking minds when they found out. Story 33. It's my wife's family, but it goes like this. My great aunt was one of the family's only survivors back in World War II. Other than her were her brother and sister, one of which grew up to be my wife's grandparent. I can't remember which, I never met them. The siblings were much younger then, so they didn't remember much. Well, the great aunts end up writing a book about her experience fleeing the country to escape. In it, she details the passing of several family members during a march through a blizzard. Real dramatic stuff. Well, it turned out many years after her passing, my wife's dad got a letter from one of the relatives. It turns out the great aunt didn't like the 2 family members who passed away in her book. They had just parted ways at some point during the escape. She wrote them out of the family in her book and took the secret to her grave. Fortunately, their last name is very unique in the world because of how many of them didn't survive, so once the relatives started searching the US, they popped up right away. This happened about 3 years ago, I think. Hungarian grudges are legendary. Story 34. I got a list. Grandma was a lesbian. Older family member spilled the beans about the real reason for her sudden divorce in a conversation the night my mom passed away. But I'd had suspicions before that. She shared a bedroom with the same woman from the time she divorced till the day she passed away. I'd also been told her ex-husband was a huge liar. Had never served in any military ever other than as a volunteer bus driver for the VA in the 90s. Found a bunch of telegrams clearing out stuff after Dad passed away. They were from various European locations via the US Army to my grandma, talking about missing her and when he'd be back stateside. Was also told great-grandfather, same side, was a giant of a man and towered over the rest of the family. His immigration papers, found around the same time as the telegrams and dated at least a decade later than we'd always thought he came to the US, put him squarely at 5'7". His wife was a 6-foot-tall woman. According to various hospital paperwork we found, both were sadly long gone before I came along. Mom wrote a note sometime in the mid-'80s. I found it about a month after the previous ones. I'm the only one that knows about this one, in the family. I'd honestly see no reason and have no desire to tell any of the rest. She obviously changed her mind, and showing or reading it that literally anyone else mentioned would bring harm to them and no peace to me. And what I knew about most of my life that no one else is still living did. My mom was pregnant 9 times. She only had 2 kids, but had they all lived or been carried to term, we would have been number 2 and number 10 of them all, because one was apparently twins. And the first would have had a different father because she was married for a year in the late 60s before she met my dad. Story 35. I had a female relative who used to be a club dancer back in the late 90s. My mom always told me that they found out through a friend who would drive past the workplace. She ended up quitting her job as a waitress. She still attends parties and holiday events with us, but no one ever brings it up. Well, 2 years ago, I found out what really happened. One night she was working and saw my dad there, who was married and had a baby who just got surgery done at the time. He ran home and told my mom, and my mom ended up telling Grandma, and Grandma told the whole family. Her relatives would get letters shaming her for what she was doing. To be honest, I felt bad. People were concerned that she was a dancer rather than a married man with a baby at home at a club. Story 36. My mom's mother was actually her grandmother, while her oldest sister was in fact her bio mom. Apparently, my mom's bio mom got pregnant at 18, unwed, and her parents covered it up by sending her away until she gave birth and pretending they had a new baby. Her dad was a military officer, and this was in the 1940s, so it was considered really shameful, thus the cover-up. Mom had no clue because no one knew. The ones who knew didn't tell her, and her birth certificate was falsified. How did this all come to light? In 8th grade, I had to do a family history project. My mom called some of her relatives to help me out. One of her cousins, who was much older, accidentally let some information slip, which led to my mom suspecting the circumstances of her birth or identity. My mom confronted her bio mom, who I knew as my aunt, and it was upsetting for them both. Her bio mom was shamed and told to keep quiet about the whole situation by her parents, while my mom was raised by parents who treated her horribly. My mom always said that growing up, she felt like she was unwanted. Now my mom feels relieved because her childhood makes a lot more sense now. She and her bio mom were always close and were raised as sisters, and fortunately, they're speaking again. And my mom visited her last week. Story 37. Oh well, my grandma ended around 6 to 7 soldiers and or policemen, paying other people. This was because a policeman ended one of her children. When she asked for help to the military, but they told for her to screw off. The police force in my country is useless and corrupted. So she went to the next country and employed Terminators to end all these people, and they got them. My grandfather had so many children that I accidentally met a distant cousin in a workplace. My grandmother was okay with this, as long as everything in Grandpa's job was for her. Lands, houses, animals, etc. Just to be clear, my grandma is the sweetest person in the world, so this was a surprise. Also in the same family, another family member that I never met, his wife was ended by a man with a lot of power. So he waited for 7 years of the plan to finally find him alone in the land and end him. Absolutely everybody in the town knew he did it, but they were too scared of the whole family. And my other part of my family. My other grandma had 11 children with different fathers. They told me my grandma was the most beautiful woman in the whole town, and I believe it. I loved her so much. I never met my grandfather. My father is the first child. And it wasn't until last year that my mom told me this. I'm in my 20s. Story 38. My 97-year-old great aunt had a baby at 16. Gave it up for adoption. It was supposed to be secret, but I did the ancestry DNA, and we matched. The girl had the birth certificate that had my great aunt's middle name as her first name. My immediate family couldn't ever figure it out. The parents went to my great uncle, great aunt's brother, and kept asking. They finally gave in and told him that's what happened, and said, there's a lot of other family secrets too. I'm still curious about that. Everyone at our most recent family reunion, 2019, was talking about it. Great aunt is mad everyone knows now, and she will not meet her daughter after all these years. They live in the same town. It's sad. I really just want to invite her to the reunion. What is the deepest, darkest secret you know about someone close to you? I found this out about one of my most trusted friends during an intoxicated round of whose childhood was crazier. His older sister had been mistreated by a neighbor repeatedly over a summer before he had found out. He said he only remembers feeling focused, like he had a job to do. Broke into this man's basement and hid until he went to sleep, went into his bedroom, and ended him. He then went and told everything to his, at the time, dealer uncle, who then went back to the apartment, harmed the guy again with the same weapon, and then called the cops and waited. His uncle served 10 years. My friend served 3 combat tours and is starting medical school next fall. W uncle, but at the same time, I feel really bad for him. Story 2. I work for a large company that consists of several retail locations and a handful of distribution centers. It is fairly well known in California. Everyone at the corporate headquarters regularly does hard substances. And by regularly, I mean at the office. I've gone to meetings to review product reports and been offered to play with a few lines. But it's super freaking easy work, which helps while I go to college and I get paid a lot. Story 3. After being the great listener and hearing everyone's dark secrets, I make it a point to be as little involved in that aspect of friends' lives as I can be. It weighs too heavily, especially when there's nothing they will do about it. One particularly horrifying one was a friend who lives across the country, not giving her 6-month-old baby the vital medicine she needed to keep the huge hole in her heart from getting any bigger. That nearly ended me inside. Story 4. My ex had intimacy with her brother. It started in 8th grade. Me and this girl had become really good friends, and I had started to fall for her hard. Now, before this, I had never thought of myself as anything but straight, but there was just something about her that I loved. We eventually got together and dated for a while. We fooled around a lot, but due to our parents and distance issues, she had moved away. We ended up breaking up. We were still friends, though. Then she began talking to her biological dad who had left her as a child, and she found out had an older brother who lived a few states away. We both, of course, began talking to him. Soon she got me and him dating, and that lasted about 2 months. After that, me and her fooled around every now and then, nothing serious ever coming from it. Fast forward to about a year ago. Me and her were becoming very distant, both seniors in different high schools, no time to actually hang out. Eventually, I started dating her brother again, mostly just because I wanted to keep her in my life. This didn't stop me and her from messing around. Yeah, it was weird, but her brother knew about it and was okay with it. One day during one of our makeout sessions, things got heated and she ended up telling me how when she had gone to visit her brother over the summer a few years back, they had intimacy on a few occasions and were very intimate with each other. It was an instant mood ender. This and many other reasons were the cause of why we are no longer friends. So that's my messed up story of how my ex told me she was sleeping with her brother. Sweet home Alabama. Jesus. Story 5. Around 4 years older neighbor of mine, who I looked up to as a kid, showed up at my door one night, intoxicated, looking for a cigarette. My boyfriend and I were drinking a bit, so we smoked and invited her in. I left for a bit and came back to find her passed out on the couch. I woke her up to leave and she kept crying and trying to hold my hand. She told me her dad mistreated her, and she couldn't go home because she was scared he'd do it again. She was gone before I woke up the next day, and we haven't spoken since. I don't know if she knows that I know, but I feel bad for the girl. I would assume she hasn't confronted things yet. Call the cops. Story 6. I had a teenage cousin that used to play doctor with my other cousins, all adolescents, both male and female. It was a freaking freak that was obsessed with intimacy. However, none of the parents knew or even wanted to acknowledge it if it was brought up to them. He's grown now and seems to have normalized. He settled down with a woman and bought a house. He seems to be more stimulated by gardening and shopping now. I even asked him about his history of mistreating his family, and he almost cried as he admitted he was a confused teen. He says all he wants is to be with his wife now. Story 7. When I was about 4 or 5, my sister, who was 5 years older than me, used to make me play a game called Scratch and Sniff. The game was basically me scratching herself through her PJs and smelling it, and she would laugh. It wasn't until I got older that I knew what it meant. I have an older brother, too, who's 8 years older than me. My relationship with him is pretty strong. He's always been good to me. My sister used to mistreat him. I don't know the details, but she was or is still extremely messed up. This literally broke my family. Years passed on. My mother continued to love her and forgive her. Too much. She was homeless for a while, after smashing everything in her house for no reason, until she got pregnant and came running back. She had a beautiful baby girl she continued to neglect. She would leave the baby in bed for so long that she'd start playing with her own mess and smearing it everywhere whilst she was taking substances. She never bathed her, and her house was a mess. My family tried so hard to intervene, but could only do so much. Social services took her in July, and we've been fighting so hard for our little girl. And my mother and I finally got some good news last week, and we'll be taking care of her from January. But I will never forgive her. Story 8. A recently good friend of mine told me the story of his life. When he was 2 to 3 years old, his father used to put substances in his gums when he was teething, only to get him used to it completely by the time he was 5. His step-uncle mistreated him when he was around 6 or 7. Also, he used to mistreat his stepbrother, and he walked in on the uncle. His stepfather used to harm him, and he found out at the age of 9 that his father was a kitty fiddler. He lived his life out being a user until he was around 32. He got intoxicated, as he usually did one night, and mistreated his best friend's daughter. He got caught. He's now out on probation. I'm the only person he's ever told outside of family, and still most of them disowned him, that didn't judge him and hate him. I know what he did was horrible and wrong, but I feel for him from his past and still have a place in my heart for him. I am conflicted as well. Story 9. One of my best friend's dads is in prison for termination. Growing up, her dad was never around, but she would talk about going up to visit him about 5 hours north of our hometown, but I began to realize she had never stayed all night with him or anything like that. I'd never seen any pictures of them together except when she was a baby. One day I asked my mom about him, and she told me he was in prison for termination. The stepmother and I Googled his name and found out his story. Apparently, he and 4 other guys had been robbing multiple banks in our area, and the police bugged the hotel room they were in and ended up hearing their plans to end some people they weren't on good terms with. They also found out he fired at a girl behind a local bar a few blocks from my house. Maybe this story is crazy to me because I'm from such a small town. Anyway, my mom asked her mom about him to see what she'd say, and she spilled the whole story and explained that it was her daughter's biggest secret that she had literally never told anyone. And also, she recently posted a picture of a Christmas card he made her, with the caption, "My dad's homemade Christmas cards are the best." I felt awkward knowing that her father made that while in prison. Merry Christmas. Story 10. Found a 60 to 70 picture collection on my dad's computer. I laughed, thinking that it was funny. At the age of 24, I finally found my old man's bank stash. Lol. And I saw the face of the one girl that all the pictures were of. It was my stepsister. All of them were taken from ages of about 19 to 23. They were not self-shots, unless she had a third arm that holds her camera. She told me once when she was very intoxicated that he had brought her toys when she was in high school. Strangely, the next day I checked to see when some of the pictures were last modified and they were all gone. I'm seeing him for the first time since that day. He doesn't know I know, and I've only told my mom, his ex-wife. I know that he housed my stepsister for years after her mom. His other ex rejected her. He's always been financially generous, but as with most parents, he wants to see that if he's going to pay for some of your school, that you will get decent grades, etc. However, he bestowed large amounts of money on her and required her to do nothing. Wow, smells like a lot of jail time. Story 11. While in 7th grade, a girl I had never talked to, one of the popular ones, came up to me. Me being socially awkward and found every conversation with a girl an intimate advance, I listened. He told me that she had tried to end it all a number of times with her mom's pills, but she had made it somehow, and then she told me she had fooled with over 20 adult men and one woman for cash and stuff, even though she had a boyfriend. She then told me that she thought about ending it all every day and how much she hated everyone she knew, including her boyfriend. When I asked her, "Why are you telling me all this?" she simply replied with, "Because I don't know you, and I know you're a nice guy, so you won't tell anyone, and even if you did, no one would believe you if you did because everyone would question why I told you all this. Because all they know is that I'm a healthy, popular, straight-A student, and you're just a loser who will never get anywhere in life." We never spoke again, and she's currently 19 and in a relationship with a guy who's closer to 30 than 25. She's happy now, I hope. She read you to filth and you wish she's happy? Crazy. Story 12. Last Christmas, during my boyfriend's family holiday party, this is a family that likes to get down. Loud music, lots of expensive liquor, and good times until about 4 in the morning. Last year, I partook in the festivities and got good and intoxicated. I fell asleep on the couch, clothes and all. There were multiple people sleeping on the floor in the living room. I woke up around 9 to someone rubbing my lower belly. I was disoriented, so I assumed it was my boyfriend. At this point, I was awake and I realized that it was my boyfriend's brother's friend. I pushed his arm away and he just rolled over like nothing happened, sleeping on the floor. I never told anyone. I'm so thankful that I was wearing tights. I've been reminded that it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. You have to sleep with one eye open. This year, I will not be going to the holiday party, and I wish I had said something when it happened. It makes me nervous knowing he might be there, and other unsuspecting women might fall victim to his creepy slumber prowling. Also, I was always one of those girls who would say that if a man ever tried anything funny with me, I'd kick his bum. I didn't. Story 13. In high school, there was this girl who I slept with. Christine, we'll call her. Well, once after we had intimacy, I laid next to her and we got to talking. She told me that when she was a kid, 6 to 12, her cousin used to mistreat her. I knew her cousin and we were acquaintances. I got so angry, but didn't let her know. I just listened. I took her home. Later, I decided I would hang out with him at my sketchy friend's house. Me and my friend beat him. I told him to never talk to Christine again or I would end him. He had his mouth wired shut for months. He moved away finally. You know what? Hell yeah. Story 14. My best friend's dad when I was growing up was into messed up stuff. So when I was growing up, about 16 or so at the time, I had been friends with this guy for about 4 to 5 years at this point, and he was absolutely one of my best friends. Him and my other friend and I were kind of a terrible trio, always doing stupid crap together. Well, anyway, I'm pretty good with computers, and people know that. So I was always getting asked to come over and fix someone's machine, etc. So my friend's dad, who was this awesome, super nice guy, happens to be an entire family of very devout, awesome Christians, asked me to come over and fix his computer because it's acting funny. I didn't think anything of it. I went over and started working in his computer, which was tucked into a corner in the back of this room. So I'm left alone because, to be honest, at the time I knew way less about troubleshooting than I do now. It took me a lot longer to fix computers than it does now, so I'm back there for probably about an hour or so, messing with this slow computer, and I noticed that the NVIDIA folder is like 2.8 gigabytes. This was back in the year 2000. 2.8 gigabytes in one folder was a gigantic red flag, especially for some silly little e-machine. I took a look, and yeah, found lots of corn, tons of it. A lot of it looked like the guy's daughter. Not as in it was his daughter, but like it was looking at little girls that resembled his daughter. I was grossed out and deleted the whole folder. I considered the machine fixed at that point, and went outside to hang out with my friend. His dad came up later and sat down with us on the porch table outside and asked about the computer. I told him his NVIDIA folder had become corrupted and I had to delete it. I told him that if that NVIDIA problem ever came up again, I might need to look into the proper way of getting rid of it. It's kind of hard to accurately describe the look of terror that hit this man's face, but I got my point across and he understood that I knew. I've never told my friends this. The only person that knows is my ex-wife and another friend of mine. I've always wanted to tell him, but the time has passed now. I have no evidence since I deleted it, and I just could not, at 16 years old, be responsible for destroying my friend's family. I've always just kind of hoped that he took my warning and never did it again. Story 15. My cousin was mistreated repeatedly by her father over many years ago. She went to the police and there was a court case, but her mother said it was just her trying to get attention. She fell pregnant and the baby was terminated in the 7th month due to being malformed. Brain outside of the head, 2 hearts, and much worse. He's never been charged or found guilty in any way, but my cousin, who is now in her 40s, is going through hell as she's remembering more and more all the time. She's had a few breakdowns and is a mess. I wish I could do something to make him pay, but without my cousin's support and without his wife, my aunt, coming forward and saying something, nothing will be done and she'll never do that. I did spread the news throughout the whole family. Well, I told a few people and the word spread, so everyone avoids him and my aunt now. Maybe that is to be his punishment, living a lonely old life with nobody caring or giving a crap about him. It's what he deserves. Well, he deserves even more, but, Story 16. His parents had passed away at birth, so he had been raised by his aunt and uncle, but they got in trouble with the law. He got out of the area before they arrested him as well, but the cops are still officially hunting him to this day. He then fell in love with his sister for a short period of time, but then they broke up soon after. I do know that later on in life, him and his sister discussed what happened and came to terms with it. I don't know the specifics though, since all I did was eavesdrop a little, but I did hear that his father was Darth Vader and he had to go confront him on the Death Star. Wow, you really had me on that one, buddy. Story 17. My best friend from elementary school was mistreated by her older brother's best friend. He made her go into her closet and give him a whistle. I'm the only person she ever told. Another best friend from elementary school was mistreated along with her sister. They were at the golf course with their dad and his friend. The friend took them one at a time on a golf car ride, where he proceeded to give them Skittles and then mistreated them. She said later she asked her mom what being a V-card meant, and when she told her, said, "I don't think I'm pure." In high school, she ran away from home and was hitchhiking and was picked up by a random man, and he also mistreated her. Out of my 6 best friends from elementary school, I'm the only one whose parents are still together. Every time their father cheated on their mother, 2 of them were their babysitters. Some of these friends don't know some of the details that I do. One of my former friends from high school is addicted to corn. He makes money from doing web shows. I don't know if he does anymore. He also sent my friend and I pictures of his things at least weekly for over a year. My best friend from high school and her now ex-boyfriend robbed 3 girls from our school to buy more pills. She also used to be a klepto. Dog, where do you live? Story 18. Last year, I found out my best friend, who had been my friend for about 6 years, lived in Israel for 2 years when he was 16 and 17. During that time, he started a small cult to punish criminals who were never convicted. Eventually, it grew to, I think, 8 countries. For a few years, they would take people who repeatedly committed other disgusting crimes. They would harm them on camera. When he first told me this, I was very skeptical, but he showed me videos. He stopped having anything to do with this cult 4 years ago. Story 19. My friend began fooling around with a dude in his 60s when we were in high school. She was 14 and lived in New York. Her dad is a fundamentalist Christian and heavily into his right to bear arms. She's such a good liar, she convinced her parents over the years nothing was going on. When she graduated, she moved across state lines to live with him in PA and told her parents it was because tuition would be less expensive. which wasn't true. Her dad told her to take her cat with her or else he would fire at it. She didn't. Her dad fired at the cat. When her parents began suspecting her once again after so many years, she married a guy her age and moved a few states south. Every time she came to visit her parents, she fooled around with the old guy. She kept this up until about a year ago. She's 22 now. Story 20. My father-in-law always talks about his time serving in Vietnam as an Army Special Forces ranger, sniper, or paratrooper. Was fired at multiple times, but I know he's full of crap. I'm a veteran and I happened to see his DD-214. He was a truck driver, served 4 months in Vietnam, then drove over a mine. He was medically discharged and received full disability from the Army, but it wasn't from being shot. I'd be interested in your opinions, but I decided that since he really did serve, earned a Purple Heart, and doesn't lie about the Medal of Honor, I never called him out. Other than that, he's a good guy and a great father-in-law. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 21. My now gone uncle terminated 2 female hitchhikers in Missouri. They were watching an episode of Unsolved Mysteries one night and they featured the crime. The description they had of the vehicle and the criminal matched my uncle to a T. We were all living in California at the time, and he was in Missouri at the time in question. He used to go out there once a year for business, like American pickers, to buy old farming stuff for dirt cheap, then sell it in California for a bunch of cash. He stopped going out there about the same year this crime happened. The family members that saw it, myself, stepdad, aunt, and perhaps others, never spoke of it after that night, and no one ever made a call about it. Story 22. My husband inadvertently slept with his half-sister when they were both still teenagers. Due to a lie his father told him, the Hubs did not know she was his sister, but thought they, his half-sis and her mom, were just close family friends. And his father knew what was going on between them, no less, and kept his mouth shut just to keep face with his family and avoid drama about having a child out of wedlock. His father told him all this on his passing earlier this year. Hubby is still coming to terms with it. Story 23. A female friend of mine framed a guy for mistreatment. They were both intoxicated, and then, conveniently, when her boyfriend found out they fooled around, it suddenly became mistreatment, and manipulated her boyfriend into harming him. The boyfriend's getting kicked out and still believes the girl. I don't even want to bother trying to tell him because I know it won't work. The school or court dismissed the case, and everyone who knows about what happened knows it's BS, but still there are a lot of people at the school now that just hate this totally innocent guy. He's probably going to have to transfer colleges, which blows because he's a nice dude. Don't even get me started on false allegations. Story 24. Okay, I'll begin this by saying that I've been best friends with the same group of guys for 10 plus years. There are 12 of us, and we're all pretty inseparable. We've all lived with each other at some point as well. In the group, there are 2 guys who have been best friends for at least 18 years. We're all in our early and mid-20s, so that's a pretty freaking long time to be best friends. We'll call them friend A and B. About 3 years ago, friend A knocked up his girlfriend at the time. They had the kid, and it's been great for them. 2 years ago, friend A and B and the girlfriend went to a wedding out of town and stayed in the same hotel. Friend A got intoxicated, passed out, and friend B slept with his girlfriend. Friend B does not acknowledge the bro code. Story 25. So my best friend since her diaper days got a girlfriend. Now she has a reputation as being, pardon my French, a ghetto witch hole. I hated her. She was mean to him all the time, and I think she just dated him despite her friends. They started dating in May, and during the 4th of July, I saw a truck rocking in the casino parking lot just a few minutes before the fireworks display. I walked by because I had a hunch. Sure enough, it was her and this 16-year-old 7th grader from our school doing the dance. She got pregnant, long story short, with his baby. Now, my best friend was really happy in his relationship. Since I've had a huge crush on my best friend since kindergarten, I decided to tell him after wrestling with my inner demons. I couldn't watch her lie to him like that. Well, he just got really mad at me, and he hasn't spoken to me since 8th grade, when this all went down. I really miss him. I don't know, man. He picked a side. You should cut your losses. Story 26. One of my guy friends had a girlfriend of 4 years, but then she broke up with him because he was too clingy and she was graduating soon. Our grad student's in uni for a while. He told me he still has pictures of her on his computer. When I expressed my disapproval and explained how it's disrespectful to use that for solo times if you're still not with them, he said he doesn't use it for handy time. He has them for blackmail just in case she screws with his head. Oddly enough, they're still good friends. And yet he complains about being forever alone. Needless to say, I don't volunteer to fix him up with my single friends anymore. I won't tell anyone a secret, but god damn, that's creepy crap. Story 27. Okay, here goes. Had an ex who, years before we were together, was in the habit of doing online shows, doing stuff for the cam and whatever.
One day, one of her viewers revealed himself to be a friend of her parents and then proceeded to blackmail her into doing some really messed up stuff. Oh yeah, and when I was in 6th grade, I was taking part in a school play where I had been cast as a robot. Must not have been much of a thespian. Anyway, one day I showed up early to check out some costume options with the music teacher or director of the play. They both had a few ideas, but his were, well, a little uncomfortable for me. The main one being a shoulder-cut silver leotard, a male. Reluctantly, I took the leotard with the other things to go try on and shut myself in the room where I had been directed to change. Upon entering the room, my spidey sense started tingling. So instead of changing, I started poking around through the conspicuous piles of clothing that had been left atop a wheeled TV stand. To my amusement and retrospective horror, I found it concealed there in a rolling video camera. Leaning my face down close to the lens, I shook my head, waved a finger back and forth, and never told anyone about that, although I once hinted very broadly, knowing that he knew what I knew, to him and was nearly expelled. Story 28. Okay, so I have a few. My cousin was mistreated by her father from a very young age. Her mom kicked him out after she found out what was happening. However, her brother, who knew what had happened to his sister, goes and meets up with him every so often. Her mom ended up getting with one of my other uncles. I didn't mind him until after my grandma had passed away. He was there when this happened. He stole all of her jewelry, all of her possessions, which would have been worth some money, and did a runner. No one has seen him since, except I saw him once and he smiled, then quickly ran off. I have a messed up family. Now on to the next secrets. One of my friends in school got pregnant around 14 to a guy who was 22. She got a termination. She got pregnant again at 16. Had another termination. Miscarried and now has a baby on the way again. She's only ever told me and her mom. I honestly don't know why she won't just keep her legs closed. Story 29. I know far too much about most of my friends. So much so that just about every single one of them at one time or another got mad at me for telling someone else something I wasn't supposed to. And I don't mean something they told me not to repeat. I'm not a gossip. If you don't tell me not to repeat it and I don't think it's something that shouldn't be repeated, then I don't know why they get mad at me. Anyway, my point is that I've been told so much that most of the time they just expect me not to say anything. Now back on topic. One of my close friends had cancer when she was younger, and her mom has no idea even to this day. Had a cruel husband, more mentally than physically, and some inappropriate things that her husband did to her. Most of the stuff I remember was stuff she has told me. I hung out with her a lot more than most of my other friends at the time. Story 30. My sister is a substance user. A girl I know got mistreated while passed out of college. The guy who mistreated her is now in jail for identity theft. Thank God that piece of crap was a piece of crap even before he mistreated her. My dad cheats on my mom. Most likely, anyway. People can be crappy and stupid and horrible, but you gotta love them anyway. Also, my mom once casually told me she got mistreated by a neighbor when she was a little kid. In her words, I remember I used to love playing with him. I don't remember much, but I remember my brothers beat the crap out of him and everyone else in the family warned me to never go near him again. Looking back, I'm pretty sure he mistreated me. The way she said this was like, whatever, man. I found it more disturbing for whatever reason. Also, this one is actually more messed up than the rest of these depressing tidbits from my life. My grandma used to clean for a bunch of priests. Why a bunch of grown men couldn't do their own damn dishes is anybody's guess. Anyway, she used to bring me along now and then. I remember one was very smiley and touchy-feely and crap. Understandably, this scared the living crap out of me, even when I was 5. Later on, I found out that he got caught in a public bathroom at the beach. Well, they're not beating the allegations. Story 31. My good friend John was really into trying new things during high school. He told me a story about his friend trying something called Nexus and how he was going to take it with him. He freaked out before taking it and went home. His friend never made it home, passing away in the dark basement of some random stranger's house. John was questioned by feds and had hoped it was all over. About 3 years ago, he got a call from some lawyer telling him he was being sued and possibly arrested for the passing of his then close friend. I had never seen someone look so gone inside after hanging up a phone. It was painful to just watch. Story 32. I have a friend. Let's call her Nikki. He used to live with me in the ghetto. The only 2 white people for literally miles. Nikki was hot, though, which is irrelevant. There was a pit bull who lived next door in the backyard, and it would bark all day and all night. It also just had puppies. Well, Nikki had finals, and Nikki decided that she needed some sleep, so Nikki decided to give the dog a little dose. Well, that sure as crap shut the dog up all night. So Nikki took her finals and went about her life. Later, the neighbor came up and told her about how one of the puppies passed away. Still a secret to this day, and I'm the only person who knows. Story 33. This one time I went to my friend's house to stay over and have a good time.
It turns out that my friend fell asleep and I heard his mom tearing up in her room on the second floor all the way in the back. Well, I was on the first floor by the front door playing video games. At first I was just like, she's possibly watching a movie or whatnot. But in reality, she wasn't. I went up there and asked her what had happened. We talked for an hour or so until she gave me signs she wanted to sleep with me. I loved it, and now I know a lot more than the average boy, but I don't consider it mistreatment since I kissed her first. The worst part is that my friend and I went to grammar school and I left to high school. Never in my life I thought I would see them again. But about a year later, I saw him and her at my school freshman orientation. We both know it happened. Yeah, none of us have the guts to tell him we slept with each other. Story 34. A friend told me of how when she was 9 years old, she was mistreated by her pastor when her parents forgot to pick her up from Sunday school. He threatened her and her family if she told anyone. And she had never told anyone until me. She was 16 when she told me. She felt horrible because an even younger girl was also mistreated and found in the church parking lot weeks later, and the police didn't figure out who it was. She recently discovered that she can't have children because of it, and she has been haunted by nightmares and psychological problems relating back to the attack. Somehow, though, she has forgiven him. Story 35. My best friend of many years is still good friends today with a girl she's been close to since kindergarten. When they were kids, her friend's older brother used to mistreat them all the time when the parents left him in charge. Sometimes the friend's grandma would take her granddaughter out to lunch, and my best friend would be left alone with the brother. Once the two girls were out at the park, about 8 years old, and the brother brought a group of his friends to harm his little sister, and though luckily my friend barely escaped that particular incident, she was forced to bear witness to it. My friend didn't remember any of this until she had a severe bout of sickness during her sophomore year of high school, shortly after I met her. Memories are still coming back to her in pieces, even now, years after her first recall. Also, a good friend of mine who I've known for several years wants to start an affair with me. He has a wife and child whom I've also been close with the whole time I've known him. I'm not going to do it, of course, but it bothers me all the time, just knowing he almost kissed me once. Story 36. The details I'm a little fuzzy on, but my dad's father passed away when he was 3. His mom remarried, and apparently, while growing up, his stepdad mistreated him, or at least tried, a couple of times. When my dad was 18, he finally told the family and pressed charges on his stepdad. Turns out his stepdad was doing to a younger cousin, and they came forward as well. They went to court, and my dad's 2 sisters testified against my dad, calling him a liar. The stepdad was found guilty, and my dad vowed to not talk to his sisters and mom ever again. He went to UF for college, and his mom got into his bank account and cleaned him out. My dad had to drop out and move in with my mom's family. Needless to say, I've never met my grandma or aunts from my dad's side, but met pretty much everyone else on his side. He doesn't know I know this, though. My mom told me a couple of years ago. Story 37. I remember my mom and my now-gone aunt used to take a lot of baths with each other when she was alive. I also remember when I was very young, walking in on my mom and aunt having intimacy with each other, and my mom telling me after I saw never to tell anyone. I didn't. Fast forward a few years later, my aunt ended herself, and 2 years after that, my mom comes out of the closet and leaves my dad. I don't regret not telling anyone about it, but when I was at a get-together with my 2 other cousins, my aunt is their mom, I mentioned it in passing. They told me they knew all along, and the only people in the family that had no clue are our grandparents. That is a very big family secret. Story 38. My best friend when I was little, they adopted a kid. Some family friend had passed away, and her son was bopping around foster homes, so they adopted him. He was a bit troubled. May have been mistreated a bit, certainly neglected. He was behind a bit in school and would steal things and lie. In that way that trouble kids do, not in a vicious kind of way. When it became clear that he was gay, or worse, they kicked him out of the home, though they say it's because he was out of control. He ran off to the nearby biggish city, was homeless and 17, got in trouble, went to jail, now lives as a woman and is kind of happy, actually. They act like he, never existed. She wasn't invited to her brother's wedding. It's like they took a mulligan in the whole thing and won't own up to what actually happened to the poor kid they swore to protect. Like I said before, some people don't deserve to be parents. Story 39. I don't exactly live in a small town, but a lot of us in the younger peer groups know each other and hang out in really big cliques where we all know each other and anybody connected to that group of people. Well, there's this guy that grew up with all of my friends. He was in the Marines when we first met, and we just talked a lot and had a really smooth friendship. Well, he quit the military recently and we started sleeping together. Nothing serious, just late-night half-sober calls. It was pretty rough, but the last time we slept together, he was just cruel. I have bruises all over my body and I just feel freaking broken. The whole time I was fighting him, pushing him, telling him no. There's more to it. It was just so cruel. I used to like intimacy a lot, and now when guys hit on me, I just want to hide, which I know will go away after a while.
I told one person, but don't want to tell anybody else because everybody I know grew up with him and I'll either end up alone or tear the group apart. Story 40. My father has had intimacy with multiple girls back in his home country. I know because when I went to visit him, he would point out beautiful girls in their mid-20s and tell me that he's been fooling with them since. Being born and brought up in a rich, developed nation, it blew my mind how socially acceptable it was to do that in this place. On a side note, and in no way am I trying to justify what my dad did or does, I was tutoring English to a 12-year-old and she definitely wanted more than English lessons. I told my dad about it and he just said, "Well, why didn't you go for it? Didn't you think you're the first person she's done it with? Don't be naive." Story 41. My best friend was sold for substance by her bio dad. She was saved by the fam. She's been mistreated 4 times, but she'd only talk about it when we were really hammered. She was abandoned for a year and raised herself for a year in that period. Her stepdad, parents, have been convicted of growing grass twice in the same house. She has gambling habits and has lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Joe's thousands. She drinks her face off. She's very depressed. I called the cops and stopped her this summer. She tried again a couple of days ago while I was out of town, for family reasons. She's attempted many times in the past. She's been in institutions, halfway-style houses, done therapy, and doesn't believe anything will ever help her. I don't judge her when she does crazy things. She was dating 8 guys at once. But I don't try to stop her, but I'm trying to stay within an ear she can talk to. She's also crazy bright and could be an amazing artist. Story 42. A girl I know was mistreated last year. She didn't tell me any details. I didn't pester her into revealing them. She said she's just now accepting that it was mistreatment, because her oppressor and her mom convinced her it was her fault. She's been dealing with depression and anxiety ever since and has been self-destructive. What she means by that? I don't know. It can mean she has no self-esteem, which is normal for depression. Or it can mean she's been doing substances, or it can mean she's been harming. I don't know. The weird thing is, you wouldn't know it by a quick glance at her. She's one of the most intelligent, outspoken, and sweetest people I've ever met. Really. I'm not 100% sure what she told me. We're not super close friends or anything. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.